Okay. Good morning, everyone. So it's January 23rd, 9 o'clock, and we're going to start the General Government Committee meeting. Clerk, could you take roll, please?
Supervisor Mulhern?
Here.
Chair Hashak?
Here. All right, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so the meeting's been called to order. We're going to start on item 2A, which is discussion and possible action, including direction to staff regarding the development of Mendocino County's 2023 legislative platform. You know, in the meeting in December that the General Government Committee had, that there were some items, especially in regards to cannabis, that have not yet been incorporated into the legislative platform. And so the proposal today is to work on those and bring them back in February so that we have a more complete legislative platform and that we can deal with those issues at that point. Okay. Is there anything else that needs to be added to the legislative platform?
Dylan Knowles, Executive Office. Currently, we are pretty much updated on it from everything except for the cannabis. We are still working a little bit on the homelessness section that we've added. Supervisor Mulhern is assisted with that, but we're just seeing if we can add anything extra in there that we might have missed on the first go-around. And then the only other change that I have on here is on the table of contents, we have health and human services listed out with social services, mental health, public health, and environmental health. And it should be behavioral health and not mental health, so we're going to change that little edit on there.
Okay. And there were some questions about the public records request. And I was looking through the platform. I couldn't find anything on that. So is there something that's going to be added? Or I brought it up in the last.
So we are looking to add something. I haven't really been able to find too much of things that we can do for it. I've reached out to our third-party company that helps us with the legislation to the state, and they don't have anything. I've also reached out to Sonoma County, Humboldt County, and Orange County, and I'm trying to get just a little bit of feedback from them for things that they might be trying to add into their platforms. So we are looking for it. Any suggestions, anything that you have that you want in there, I'd be happy to add it in there, but I don't have a lot on it yet.
Okay, and I can work with CSAC on it too.
Please. Yeah.
All right, very good. Anything else at this point? Yes, CEO Antle.
Thank you, Chair Hashak. I would just like to acknowledge Dylan for all the work he's been doing on this and reaching out to all the departments. We still need to hear from BHRS, Behavioral Health, and Public Health. We really want to put something in about community health workers and get that updated and do a push this year for community health workers and funding in our county.
Oh, excellent. Yes. All right, very good. All right, any comments? Okay, are there any public comments?
Good morning. I hope everybody had a good weekend. Hannah Nelson. I'm just wondering if it's me or whether the website did not receive memos that were submitted on this item. At any rate, I happen to know that MCA, who I'm not speaking on behalf of, but did submit a memo, and I think all it did was incorporate a lot of the issues that were previously discussed and brought forward as not having been yet incorporated, and now that it's a new year, I think that they set them forth, and I just thought I'd mention that because as I'm looking at the online materials, I don't see their memo, and I just wanted to raise that in case there are issues with timing of uploading of memos in all of the agenda items today. Thank you.
For clarification, it is loaded on e-comment, and it was as of last night.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, any other public comment? Okay, are there any in the Zoom world? Okay, Paul Hansberry. Good morning, Paul.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. This is Paul Hansberry, Lovingly and Legally. I would like to underscore and emphasize something that my partner Susan and I have been promoting for about 6 years now, and that's better access to microbusiness. We proposed a cottage microbusiness license quite some time ago that the board approved of in concept and sent a letter to the representatives in Sacramento as well as lobbyists. Unfortunately, COVID derailed that campaign, and I would like to see that revived. So anyhow, thank you very much, and we agree with all of the memo that was sent by MCA. We agree with all of their talking points, especially with regards to microbusiness. I'd like to expand it to incorporate a whole new license. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. All right. Next is Corinne Powell.
Good morning. Thank you all. I am wanting to discuss again the opportunity for this committee to suggest to the full board that Mendocino County follow many of the other producing counties in helping small farmers by reducing our local cannabis tax. Several counties have reduced it to zero. Other counties reduced it by at least 50%. And I want you to realize that these other producing counties are similar to our farmer community. They are also our competition. And any time that we are disadvantaged at the marketplace, it has a huge economic ripple effect through the community. So from past discussions on this subject, Supervisor Williams had brought it up. He has retreated because he said he thought there were no votes on the board to pass such an accommodation. I believe that if this committee recommends it to the full board, Supervisor Williams would join you and it could become a reality. So I'm requesting that you discuss this very seriously and urgently, as the true up tax will be imposed for the 2022 calendar year sometime very soon. Now is the time to act. Please consider this request. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Corinne. All right. If there's no further comments and no further action on this, we will move on to item 2B. Okay, discussion and possible action, including providing recommendations to staff regarding the local jurisdiction assistance grants program, direct grant and fee waiver program application guidance manual, and referral of the manual to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation that it be approved. All right, so are we going to Director Nevedal?
Sure, thank you. Just maybe give me a moment and I am happy to screen share the documents, which might make it easiest to walk through in that format. So let me go ahead and get those documents up on my screen. Okay.
Kristen, could you move the mic just a little bit closer?
Yes, let's see if I can.
Squeeze it through there. Thank you.
Okay, let's see how this works. Oh, thank you, Steve. Okay, so maybe the thing to do is to start first with the manual and then do a walkthrough of the application. The manual really, I used the template from the Local Jurisdiction Assistance Grant Program, the template for the state's manual, just for simplicity. The manual is quite long, but hopefully thorough enough to provide the information necessary to complete the application and application forms with some ease. The sections that are highlighted in blue within the manual itself still need some updating, and I think could be in some areas points of conversation for today. We are looking at a timeline for the timeline here. So notice of grant funding, we would like to, we did put the draft application and the guidance materials out on January 20th, which is officially the notice of funding availability according to this timeline. Application guidelines and application forms, we anticipate publishing the final forms in fillable PDF form along with the supplemental documents or materials template and the budget template and an in-kind / matching funds template. We anticipate publishing all of those materials formally on February 3rd. We need to do a significant website update to get those materials published. So between now and January 3rd, we'll also be updating the Cannabis Department's website so that there's a cannabis grants page where applicants will be able to find this information. We'd like to open the application submission period on February 17th. We selected this date based on knowing that the materials would need to go back to the board for consent, and we didn't want to open up an application timeline before both the General Government Committee and the board had a chance to provide recommendations if that was the will of the board. So we will open up the timeline for applications on February 17th, which between now and February 17th, we anticipate receiving written questions at the department regarding the application itself and potentially the guidance document. And then we plan to post the responses to those questions publicly on the website on February 24th. So there should be ample time for the public to ask questions and then for us to group those questions together and respond to them in writing for the public. We will also hold, and it doesn't show in this schedule, but we will hold at least one meeting as we know more about whether recommendations will be made to the application and the guidance document. So we're a little reticent to hold a public meeting, explain the application and the guidance document, and then we're concerned that the board or the standing committee may request changes, which then would have us going back to the public and could have been confusing. So we'd like to wait and hold the public meeting after we know whether or not changes will be requested for the materials provided. The last day to submit applications we anticipate will be March 10th. This is roughly 4 to 5 weeks worth of time for folks to submit applications. And then we would spend largely the remainder of March and into April as necessary to process the applications received and then notify all applicants about whether or not they have been awarded all or a portion or none of the application they had submitted. Outstanding questions really are in the last day of grant funding expenditures. Currently, the LEAP grant program is a 12-month expenditure period. The grant agreements are for 18 months, which allows an additional 6 months after the awardee has spent down their funding, right? They have to spend their funding down in that 12-month period. And then there's 6 months in the agreement that allows for the finalization of reconciliation of receipts. The limitation on LEAP funding has been $50,000. It's going to $80,000. We anticipate the funding pools in the LJAGP grant allowing up to $100,000 in funding. And some of the projects may be substantially larger than what we see with LEAP funding. So it may make sense to extend the timeline for expenditures from, say, 12 months to perhaps allowing 18 months for those expenditures to be spent down, or longer, and then, providing an additional 6 months after expenditures are spent down to complete the reconciliation of all receipts. So that is an outstanding question that we have not put into this guidance document, simply because, again, these are all going to be capital improvement projects with the exception of CEQA document preparation. And it may take more than one work season, perhaps, for folks to complete said projects. So anyways, some thought should probably go into whether or not a 2-year timeline for spending down funds makes sense for this grant program.
I have a question about that. So if a person applies and their application is with the department, and yet there hasn't been a determination about the permit hasn't been granted because some things might be still in limbo, and the person needs to use this money for the CEQA compliance. So is everyone going to know exactly what they need to do if there's not that feedback yet from the department? How does that work?
I mean, there should be ample feedback in their other environmental documents. So this grant specifically covers, say, projects that are required by Department of Fish and Wildlife and or the water boards, right, to meet the requirements of those programs. If folks do not have complete lake or streambed alteration agreements at this time, they're going to potentially find it challenging to renew their state license in July or after July 1st of 2023, because it is a requirement that the document at least needs to be, the final LSAA at least needs to be signed by the applicant and returned to DFW on or after that July 1st date. So they should have, in I would say the vast majority of instances, those documents in this grant program serves to cover projects that are required by, say, DFW and or the water board. They also should be able to start preparation of their Appendix G materials, even while going through the review process. And the hiccups that could occur in preparing your Appendix G materials while undergoing an application review process largely are around the applicant changing the scope of their application. So if they change their permit type or reconfigure, then that can be problematic and create hiccups. I suppose there could be some pieces that are unknown if an applicant has not had the department conduct a sensitive species habitat review, but that would be a minor piece, so to speak, and the applicant perhaps could apply for assistance with their CEQA document development. And what we commonly see in the LEAP requests around CEQA document development is a base price for completing the development of the document themselves, the Appendix G materials themselves, and then additional pricing should it be determined that the applicant needs to conduct a biological survey perhaps, or some other type of survey. Expanding the grant application spend down timeline to 2 years would allow for an applicant that maybe doesn't realize today that they need a biological survey on their property to spend those funds next spring. So I think some of the timeline extension could also help create some ease. I hope that helps answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
And then final progress report due date. We have not put that in here. It would be dependent upon the spend down timeline or the expenditure timeline that we put in association with the grant funding itself. So these two pieces actually would go hand in hand. So we can't determine a final progress report due date until we determine how long the expenditures, how long the grant agreement is valid for. Okay. Definitions. These definitions, I think, are fairly thorough, but in reviewing the materials, it may be determined that additional definitions would be helpful. So this section may be updated with additional definitions as necessary. The eligible applicants and maximum direct grant funding amounts, this is almost verbatim from the grant manual itself. So not a lot to report here. And then the grant funding expenditures, we are recommending not only a robust budget that highlights and details the funding requests, but also a robust spreadsheet that highlights any in-kind or matching funds that the applicant may be bringing forward for the projects. Some of this may be in the form of, say, the applicant paying for the permits associated. So the LJAGP program does not have the same ability to waive building permits and other required permits, permits required by agencies in Mendocino County, as the LEAP program does. So what we'd like to see is when an applicant is going to be spending money, right, on the projects that they've proposed, that they put that money into the in-kind matching funds section. Additionally, there is a fairly high likelihood that some of these projects are going to be in excess of $100,000 and may be receiving funding either from Department of Fish and Wildlife grant program and or private funding methods. So it's going to be incredibly important that in order for us to award direct grant funds, that we can do our best to ensure that the projects have enough funding to be completed, even if that funding can't solely come from the local jurisdiction assistance grant program pool. So this is why we're asking for the applicants to also submit an in-kind / matching funds explanation. And they may have very well have started some of the work components in, say, a lake or streambed alteration agreement and then need assistance completing them. So that explanation would be very helpful so that we can see where we're picking up funding so that we can help them complete the project.
So if I could just clarify that. So if a person has a project that's going to cost $150,000 and they can get $100,000 from the LJAGP, then they've got to show how they're going to get the other $50,000 to complete it.
Yes.
So before the grant will be given to anyone, if it exceeds $100,000, they have to show that they can complete it.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Eligible and ineligible uses of direct grant funding. A lot of the eligible use language, almost all of it, is based on the language that is within the program manual itself. We tried to simplify it and provide some examples in here that we thought might be helpful for folks when looking towards filling out their application. I'm not planning on going through each and every one of these unless the committee members would like me to do so. And then when it comes to ineligible uses and expenses, there are general components that are ineligible. The general components listed here are out of the state's ineligible uses list as provided by the Department of Cannabis Control in their local jurisdiction assistance grant guidance document. And then we added additional examples specific to each of the categories that applicants may choose to apply for funding in. So that is what we have in this section. We have a little more information about the question and answer process. The blue highlighted LJAGP grant app web or email address has not been set up yet. It is highlighted in blue, so we'll work on getting that set up this week. Application requirements. We're going to look at the forms in a minute, but we basically are proposing multiple sets of forms. Every single direct grant applicant will be required to submit a completed general information form, and each of these tables corresponds with the form itself, providing some explanation and hopefully guidance as to how to fill out each individual section and subsection of the forms. So I don't know that I need to go through all of this right now, but that is how this is structured. So every applicant will complete, as I mentioned, a general information form, and then also submit a supplemental materials document, a budget sheet, and an in-kind / matching funds explanation. And then they will use the scope of project forms to actually request funding and explain their projects and how those projects relate to CEQA. So for applicants that are interested in submitting an application to fund local CEQA document preparation, they would use a 1.0 form to submit for that type of funding.
And at this point, is the plan for everyone to do their Appendix G forms themselves? Or have consultants, or there was talk about the department doing some of that work?
I think at this point we haven't determined exactly whether we'll be able to take on developing those materials. We are still working through our contract. So the contract for planning services has been agreed upon and is just making its way through Cobblestone. It will be uploaded today, I anticipate. The funding available for contract services is not as robust as we would need to have both contract services and the department manage application review and CEQA document development. So at this time, I'm not convinced that we have the capacity, even with contract planning services, to take on developing these documents.
All right, thank you.
For applicants that choose to apply for direct grant funding that improves air quality and reduces greenhouse gas emissions, they will utilize an SOP Form 2.0. This is the form and the materials that will be required for applying for projects, again, that improve air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In the case of an applicant who needs to remove, remediate, and or relocate a portion of their cultivation site or their operation to an environmental superior location within the same parcel or parcels associated with that application, they would utilize a Form 3.0 to submit for funding to assist with that type of development. And then scrolling down for applicants that wish to apply for funding to assist with hydrology and improved water quality, they would use a Form 4.0 to apply for that type of funding. Now, applicants may apply for funding in all four of these categories. It really is what they need or based upon what they are going to need to complete their CEQA and environmental work on the parcel associated with their, or parcels associated with their application or permit with the county. We will provide a Excel spreadsheet template that applicants can use for their budgeting. There will be a budget tab that has clear instructions on that template, and then a budget tab where they will combine all of their proposals together so we can see a master cost. And then there will also be, say, a budget tab 1.0 that they'll fill out if they are submitting a 1.0 form that details the expenses associated with completing the CEQA project development or the CEQA document development, as an example. So applicants will fill out the appropriate tabs that correspond with the project applications that they submit.
And when you talk about the CEQA form, that you're really talking about Appendix G?
For cultivators, yes, but this grant application is also available to applicants that are in other aspects of the supply chain. So the rest of the supply chain that is still permitted by Planning and Building Services, those applicants are eligible for funding as well. So we may see the need for an initial study and or the development of an environmental impact report. It is possible, but it would be an eligible, the grant would perhaps provide funding for those documents as well.
And if we have several hundred people still in the program, and we have about $10 million for direct grants, if each one of them did $100,000, that would allow for 100 applicants?
Correct, but I think it's highly unlikely that 100% of our applicants have $100,000 worth of CEQA work to complete to qualify for an annual license.
Okay.
So, and I did want to note that I did not put a scoring system in the grant application as previously discussed, and the reason for that really is that I suspect we'll receive a heck of a lot of applications from individuals who put a lot of items in there to try to get to $100,000, and perhaps not 100% of the items submitted are directly related to CEQA and achieving an annual license, and I would like to be able to, the department would like to be able to award for projects that are specific to CEQA instead of denying the entire application if there's projects within the application packet that we cannot award on. So it seemed a safer bet to not put a scoring system in place simply so that we could work with the applicant to peel out awardable projects if 100% of what they submitted was not awardable. We are going to require that applications be submitted via email and only to the LJAGP grant application email that we've set up. This will help us keep things more organized and have everything coming into a central box in a central location. So we will not accept grant applications that come into Cannabis Program at, nor will we accept applications that come into MCD-POD at. We are going to require that they all come into LJAGP grant application at mendocinocounty.org. And that is the end of my overview of the guidance materials. We can take a quick look at the application at this time. Let's see, I think I have to do a reshare. My apologies here. Okay, so here is a draft of the application itself. We will post these as separate PDFs that are fillable, which should make it fairly easy for the applicant to navigate the materials. Again, all applicants will be required to complete a general information form. The 0.1 section really is asking about the applicant information. So who is the applicant for the direct grant? That applicant must also be the named applicant on the AG numbers submitted and or CFBL numbers submitted, or the legal signatory on behalf of the business entity listed should the AG applications and/or CFBL applications or permits be in the name of a business entity. We did create a section allowing for agents to assist the applicants in providing materials to the department. So if an applicant chooses to utilize an agent, they would want to fill out this section, and then we'll be putting forward an agent consent form specific to the LJAGP grant that would also need to be filled out and submitted with the applicational materials in the supplemental documents packet. I know there was some questions about why there's a second business entity name in this section specifically, and the reason is that this section is specific to the parcels that will, where work will be conducted in relationship to these grant applications. We need to know who the owner is of the parcel. It may be different than the person applying for direct grant funds or the business entity applying for direct grant funds. And what we see is that there are occasions where the parcel or the parcels where these applicants or permits are located, the parcels themselves are in the name of a business entity. So in this section, we included business entity just in case the parcels are in the name of a business entity. And then we would need to know that, right? And need to know who the signatory is for that business entity that holds the parcels so that we can match a property owner consent form, right? So that the work can be conducted. So that's the reason for having business entity in this section as well. It is for the purposes of parcels held by a business entity. So different from the applicant being a business entity themselves. County of Mendocino application and permit description tables. I read the comment about these being somewhat confusing. We can look and see if we can make some clarifying information available or additional guidance in the guidance materials. But we do need to have a way to understand which AG and or CFBL numbers are going to benefit from the direct grants that are provided, and the corresponding Department of Cannabis Control license information. So that's what these tables are designed to do, is help simplify us receiving that information. And it does account for not just cultivation-related activities, but also facility business license type activities.
And the plan is to deal with all of these applications within the department.
Correct.
So there's no outside contractors or anyone.
Correct.
How many people do you imagine will need to be dedicated to this project?
That's unknown. It just depends on how many applications we get. I anticipate it will be a heavy workload time for myself and perhaps our chief planner. So, and then I would like to also try to, having the 4 to 5 weeks for review also gives us some time to work with county council before materials get into Cobblestone to make sure that we are approving applications and awarding direct grant funds and shaping agreements in a manner that hopefully provides some ease in that review process through Cobblestone. So I think the 5 weeks will give us ample time to manage that and bounce ideas, questions, concerns back and forth with county council. This section is really designed to help us better understand which applicants also are local equity eligible and which applicants may have applied for direct grant funding in the LEAP program or using the LEAP program, and then out of those projects that an applicant may have been provided funding for in the LEAP direct grant program, are any of the projects being applied for here in the local jurisdiction assistance grant program going to assist in the completion of projects funded under the LEAP program? This is important because sometimes what we see is as we get into a say, a CEQA document development, right, which we've funded a number of CEQA document developments through the LEAP program, that additional studies come up, right? So perhaps we'll have someone apply for a study here that wasn't included in the LEAP program, and then we'll want to have the ability to kind of look back and match those proposals together so that it's easier to award, say, a standalone study when we don't see the document development in this application. Just an example. Every applicant is going to have a combined budget, right, which may just be one of the project forms. It might be multiple project forms, so they'll simply enter the amounts on each, the total amount for each budget tab into this section of the application, which will give us a quick snapshot when we're reviewing of how much is being asked for as a whole and how it's broken down in each of the SOP forms. This will just make it, I think, easier for us to set these documents aside, go through the rest of the materials, and make sure that everything aligns. And then we get into the scope of project forms. Each of these varies based on the scope of project, but every one of them asks for a timeline, and all of them, with the exception of the 1.0 form, asks for a description of how the funding will assist the applicant in the completion of their CEQA materials and help them achieve annual licensure. We have a maximum amount of characters. It does include spaces. We need some narrative description in here, as well as supplemental materials, which folks will be prompted to provide based on what they fill out in each of these forms. But we do, again, this will be a fillable PDF, and we do anticipate that this will give us the information we need to then put together a scope of project or projects within the direct grant agreement once we get to a place where we're awarding agreements. And I don't know that I need to go through each and every one of these forms. I'm happy to do so if that is the wish of the committee. Otherwise, I think I could stop my presentation here and we could move to discussion.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay.
Any comments? Supervisor?
Yeah, I was just hoping that you could clarify some of the questions that came in through the MCA memo. In particular, I believe that you already have clarified some of the questions, but I think that there was, so we've talked about why we need the business entity. I don't think we went through the air quality, the remediation and relocation, and the hydrology, and I think if we could just answer those questions, that might streamline the conversation.
Great, so picking up on page 2 of the MCA memo, should I just knock off each of these that we haven't gone through? And
Yeah, I think that there's
start
just four items there.
Okay, great. So the MCD did file a biannual report in August of 2022, summarizing program activity through the end of June 2022. At that time, we also filed a request for amendments and modifications. That request was kicked back several months after filing it, and we've been requested by the Department of Cannabis Control to utilize different forms and provide our request in a different format. So I think that responds to 1, 2, and 4 on here. And I don't have the amount of administrative drawdown that has occurred in the past year. We are working on those numbers as we are preparing our mid-year budget report, so those numbers will be part of that mid-year budget reporting.
Will we be able to see that like next month?
When we submit the mid-year report, you'll be able to see that. It'll be in the part of the mid-year budget report.
Okay, so that will have all of the administrative part. We have two parts. We have the direct grants of 10 million, which none of it has been spent yet.
That is correct. None of the direct grant funding has been spent down. The administrative part is broken into 3 subcategories, so that explanation will be provided in the mid-year budget.
Okay, so that's the other 7 million or so.
Correct. Have MCD staffing and contractor goals been accomplished as described in the grant application? If not, how are they different? Well, we have not been able to staff until we got into the Willits location. As I referenced in the December update, which will go before the board tomorrow, we are recruiting a multitude of positions. Now, that means we've been interviewing in and around the holidays, and as we came back after the new year, we do have a couple of employment offers out. We're waiting on hearing back there. But the hiring isn't instantaneous, right? It does take time. So we request a list from HR. It takes at least 7 days generally to get the list if it's available, if there is an active list available. If not, we have to recruit, which means we have to open an application timeline. So some of the positions we're looking to fill had lists associated with them. Some of them we had to put recruitments out to the public and ask for applications. But we are actively in the process of trying to fill our vacant positions. So that is ongoing. As I mentioned earlier, we do have an agreed upon contract with Contract Planning Services, and that contract, it will be uploaded into Cobblestone. If not today, then we should get that completed into Cobblestone tomorrow so we can start the internal review process. And I do have hopes that it will come forward at least before the GGC in February, and then based on timing, it probably will not make it onto consent for the board until March because of the meeting timing.
So that contract, that's to hire outside planners
Correct.
to review the Appendix G and permits and everything.
And applications as well.
Applications.
Correct.
So that won't come on at the best case scenario until March?
Yes, because it has to come to GGC first, and then it has to go to the board for approval. So it won't be available. The earliest it will be available for General Government Committee is going to be February. And then it can't be heard by the board the next day, so then it will have to be on the first board meeting in March.
Is there a way, yeah, go ahead, Supervisor.
If there's, I hate to say that I generally believe that what the contract is going to state is going to be approved by the board. I mean, obviously, there could be delays by feedback from the community. Unfortunately, we've sort of set up this slow roll process, and I think that I would personally like to see the contract go to the board for approval instead of coming to GGC, just so that it can move faster, while recognizing that the department has a very clear timeline of how the applications are going to be approved. And it seems as though the contract could come back to GGC and then go to the board, and then that contractor could still meet those timelines. I get that. But just because of the concerns and the feelings in the community, I would like to see it be able to go straight to the board for approval. And I would imagine that it could be on consent, because I don't think it's going to be controversial.
Well, I would agree with that if that's possible. And County Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the updated rules that the board just adopted, a time-sensitive item can skip committee and go directly to the board with the consent of the committee chair.
Okay, great. So as far as this contract, how many planners are we going to be able to hire with that?
I think we can hire the planning service provider, right, has up to 20 planners that they can provide us. However, the contract is for 1.6 million, which is what was set aside in the LJAGP program. So that only gives us about 6 months of planners if we go all the way at 20. right? Bringing on 20 planners. So we have $1.6 million to spend and access to as many as 20 planners for that contract.
Well, it seems like the board has already approved that 1.6 in the grant application, and that there's no new twist on this, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so it seems like, all things considered, we should just go straight to the board.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We will follow that direction and take the contract directly to the board. Moving on to item 8 on this memo, has MCD integrated Acela costs into the revised budget projection? As I mentioned, the initial budget modifications were kicked back, and we will be integrating Acela costs into the budget modifications we are currently working on. And has the county auditor reviewed use of funds and administrative or other costs incurred by MCD since grant funds were received? I cannot speak for the auditor, but we don't spend monies down without those spend downs going through the auditor's office. So I don't know that I can offer additional information on that item currently.
So going back to number 5, and do you know how much approximately has been spent as far as the administrative cost?
It is largely, I don't know exactly how much has been spent, right? We are transferring the salaries as allotted from the LJAGP application over into that LJAGP funding pool. So again, mid-year, we'll be able to explain all of these pieces very clearly. We'll have it categorized in descriptive buckets, so to speak. But I am not prepared today to provide you with a dollar amount about what's been spent down for salaries versus what's been spent down for items that we've contracted.
But of the 7 million, do you have an idea, like you've spent 2 million or?
No, I
5
do not
million?
have an idea. No, I don't.
Okay.
I would say we're definitely under 2 million. We are significantly probably under 1 million at the time. So while we've entered into, say, the Planet contract, and we've been working with Planet, we still have not received an invoice for Planet, even though we've repeatedly asked, right? Same questions come up around how much money has been spent to Department of Fish and Wildlife. We've been asking Department of Fish and Wildlife for an invoice for over a year now. We still have no invoices. So, some of the spend down is we are still waiting for service providers to provide us invoices. Without those invoices, there's not a lot we can do.
So when you talk about the CDFW, and we haven't been able to get invoice from them, that's for the sensitive species and habitat reviews?
Correct.
And are we doing a lot of those referrals?
No, and we will not be doing a significant number of referrals in the future. We are revamping that program and how we conduct the reviews in-house. So we've been working closely with County Council and Department of Fish and Wildlife to work through the Exhibit A, which is the checklist that we utilize for our sensitive species habitat review internally. And we'll be limiting the number of referrals. This will transition CDFW into a role akin to a trustee agency, and then we will not be billed for referrals going forward for phase 1 specifically. Phase 3 may be a different story because every one of the sensitive species habitat reviews under a phase 3 application must go to CDFW, but right now, we're moving forward and do not anticipate the need for an additional contract, nor do we anticipate billing for referrals in the future.
So that means that the number of referrals will be way down.
Correct, that is what we anticipate, yes.
But any referrals we do send to CDFW could be charged to the grant.
We do not anticipate billing for those referrals in the future. CDFW has told us they will not be billing for Phase 1 referrals in the future. And so they have been conducting referrals recently, right? So there's some timelines in the report that talk about us receiving comments back in October. So we do not, again, anticipate receiving statements or an invoice for those referrals as they are taking a reduced role as a trustee agency as opposed to a reviewing agency.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Supervisor Mulhern.
I think maybe you were headed down. There were just a couple of more items there on page 3 that we hadn't discussed yet. And that was, I believe that these questions have actually been discussed in the past, but just for clarification, could you please remind the committee and the public about these? It's item 3, 4, and 5.
Sure.
Thank you.
So on item 3, there is a request that solar be an allowed expense without requiring that it be tied to transitioning from a generator or other combustion type engine. The grant application that we submitted to the Department of Cannabis Control was specific that this item would be replacing generators. And that ties back specifically to the county's performance standards in Chapter 10A17 and also corresponds to the requirement for reducing generator usage. That requirement I'm referencing is a state requirement. So I don't necessarily believe that there's an opportunity for us to allow for funding for solar development unless that solar development is specifically tied to meeting a performance standard. So I don't believe we can accommodate the request here in item 3. Item 4, consider condensing development structure fields to 4, and if applicants have more structures to provide, they can provide additional blank attachment page. It doesn't seem likely that applicants will have 12 structures to be included in this section, which adds considerable length to the application. Well, I mean, I think for this section, if you don't have 12 development activities, you just list the ones you have and you leave the rest of the application section blank. And that's what we had anticipated. But I would like to avoid having applicants, as much as possible, I'd like to avoid having applicants submit their own application inserts. It just will get a bunch of different formatting from folks. So I don't necessarily see the need to take these out. Folks literally can just leave, if they only have 4 development projects for a Form 3.0, then they can leave 8 sections blank. And then on item 5 here on Form 4.0, improve water storage for those wishing to increase water storage capabilities, and it's unclear if increasing water storage is an allowed category. Increasing water storage is an allowed category if the increased water storage actually reduces reliance on a surface water diversion or a groundwater source. So it would need to show that it's reducing reliance on other water sources. So if someone is using just groundwater, for example, and their proposal is to vastly reduce, preferably eliminate the use of that groundwater, and so their proposal for a Form 4.0 is developing a substantial rain catchment system that provides all of their irrigation water, it would fit into this category, right?
Thank you. I think that you've already mentioned that there is still a little bit of work to be done by the department to clarify some of the, a little bit of the application documents and if that could be included. I mean, obviously I do see that it says there the reduction of surface water and groundwater. Is there an opportunity for applicants to ask questions of the department, or they need to complete the application and then submit it? Is it?
There is the question period. We do anticipate and would appreciate questions being emailed to the department so that we can compile a list of responses and make them public. So, and we will hold a public meeting once we know that the application is set and not subject to changes at the request of the board.
We tend to get a lot of the same questions over and over again, so I think even these questions that were submitted today should please be included in that question and answer, because there is clarification, it has been discussed, and if we could just put that in the format, that'd be great.
We can consider these our first questions to respond to in writing.
Thank you.
And then you talked about the biannual program report was filed in August. And is that available on your website?
No, it is not. We do not have a very robust grants page. As I mentioned in the beginning of this item, we will be rewriting a page on the website. So we'll transition away from the equity grants page, put up a cannabis grants page, and then these forms will be available there in the LJAGP section. If the board wishes, we could post reports that we submit to the state to that direct grant page once it is developed.
Okay. Sounds like if people want to see it, it should be available to them.
If it's the wish of the board, we can post those to the direct grants page.
You agree?
I mean, I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
I definitely feel, I'll hold my comments until after public comment, I guess.
All right, anything else? Okay, are there public comments?
Morning, Scott Ward, Redwood Valley, Scott Ward Company. Thank you for having me. That was a lot to digest. I'm going to condense it to one man's experience going through the cannabis program. As you know, I'm a consultant. Building permits are my wheelhouse. I have three clients in the process. After 38 months, 38-month review period with no corrections, I had a client successfully get his permit from Kristen and Laura, which we're very grateful. But it took 38 months. And now we're waiting for the Appendix G to get approved. It was submitted 3 weeks ago, and I don't know the timeline on that. Haven't been told the timeline on that. My other two clients, one's originally submitted in 2017, one submitted in 2019. 18 months ago, in August, they went through the original portal program and were deemed complete. They were two of the first 5 that were deemed complete in the original portal program. We have heard nothing from MCD in the last 18 months regarding those applicants. I heard nothing today about when those deemed complete applicants in the original portal, when they are going to get reviewed for substance. It seems to me the reviews are a combination of completeness reviews and kind of diving into substantive reviews. And so we don't know the timeline. I'm listening to this and all these things are keep getting kicked down the road. What about the original people in the portal 18 months ago? What's the timeline on that? Are they going to be waiting now for Fish and Game to send an invoice or the new program set up for sensitive species review? Have their sensitive species review been referred to Fish and Game? What's going on with it in-house? Are they just parked waiting for Excella to come in and some other new portal and the in good standing portal and all of that? What is the status? We don't know these things. So that's a chief concern of mine. I've worked in government for 28 years processing ministerial permits. This is a ministerial permit process. There's no need why it should take 18 months after submitting the documents in the order, in the format, to be deemed complete and say, yeah, you got them all, and then wait and hear nothing about a review. Nobody should have to put up with that in the public from government service. This is your government. You folks run it. You guys administer it. But I could have a major subdivision and a mall permit run through planning and building in 18 months. They do 2,500 to 3,500 permits a year. She's got 400 to 500 left. I know it's a complex. I know that the 20 pages of 10817 got a lot going on, and there's a lot of interagency stuff that goes on. But 18 months after the mandatory portal submittal to hear nothing is inexcusable. Absolutely inexcusable. Not knowing the status and having the surety in government and government review hurts the economy. Hurts the economy. Being overly subjective in the grant application review hurts the economy because the money issued with the grants gets spent here and it rolls back into the county coffers, which you guys need. So it's the job of government to take care of the public and the people that are trying to go through the process they're mandated to do. These cannabis farmers that put their ass on the line, came out of the shadows and went for it, spent a bunch of money. I work cheap compared to the other consultants in the cannabis industry. I'm pretty cheap, and I do a lot of this for free because the 3 that I have in there are my friends. And an 18-month wait is inexcusable. A 38th-month review period to get a permit issued is inexcusable. I'm grateful the permit was issued. Very happy with it. My client's very happy with it. We need the Appendix G approved, and we can get a state annual. And then we're done. But what about my other 2 friends? The eligibility criteria for the grant program says camp raid. I don't know if this is off topic, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. You can shut me up if you want.
Well, Scott, why don't we, we'll call you back.
Okay.
Let other people talk.
All right.
If you're going to talk about
That's my main
the LEAP-
complaint.
The LEAP, you're talking about the LEAP
I
program.
am. Or this
Okay.
eligibility, grant eligibility criteria, period.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Okay, we'll talk about that again. But that's what I have to say about time periods. It's inexcusable.
Okay. See, Ms. Nelson?
Thank you, Hannah Nelson, and I apologize in advance, but I do have quite a lengthy list of things to go through of large scale and small scale specific to this topic, this agenda item. One of the most important things is the need for a rolling application period. The way that the proposed setup is a release of this information, then a very rigid 2-week question and answer period, only in writing, without a iterative back and forth, and then a 2-week period to submit an application, and then that's it. Then they review everything for completeness. This is hearkening back to what happened with portal people. And then after they've reviewed everybody for completeness, then they'll start the substantive review. At least that's what I'm understanding, and if I'm wrong, I'd love to hear. That's just not an efficient way. This will wind up being the same kind of delays that we saw with the portal process that was set up a similar way with a closed session, not kind of rolling submissions, rolling reviews, iterative back and forth question and answer. So I'm just red flagging that as something to be very concerned about. I totally can appreciate the balance and the need to balance the resources, but we're needing to get this money out to the people who need it so that they can get the things done to get to annual licensure. That's the point here. And it's already been a year since the county has the money from the state. So every little thing that we can do to make it speed up is imperative. One of the other larger themes is my concern that there's a lot of information that hasn't been made public and that should be made public. This is public funds from the state to the county and then on to, hopefully, applicants. The reports should be made public. There should be an ongoing, and I would request this committee to make it an ongoing agenda item of a report on what percentage of staffing is going to this grant versus other work versus the equity grant, whatever. And that should be something that is not difficult to amass if it's being kept on an ongoing basis. I'm a little bit concerned about the significant update to the website, because we know, and nobody's fault, but we know what happens when there needs to be a significant technological update in order for things to happen in the times that they are. Want to go back to the, yeah,
We'll give you another minute.
okay,
And then
I've
we'll
got,
circle back if there's,
okay, and I've got a lot of specific issues, so I hope that there's going to be the time to be able to go through them, because this is our opportunity. This is it. And the way that the question and answers are set up are more of a technical nature, and unless they have inserted in them back and forth and not just submit in writing and then announce, that's not going to help the technical part either. But with respect to how county government works and how this program works, this is our opportunity. I'm going to stop because a lot of these other issues are really technical, going through the presentation that was just made and the materials released. And then the committee can tell me what the proper forum is to be able to have this discussion. Thank you.
okay? Yeah,
Last year, when I chaired this committee, was the first year that it was requested by the full board that the General Government Committee take on cannabis items. And as the chair, I felt that in order to streamline the Tuesday Board of Supervisor meetings for the cannabis industry to have more than their 3 minutes of allotted time actually allowed for a better opportunity for communication in the public eye, which is really important to me, that the things that are being said in the meeting are heard by everybody. So if it's possible to allow people to speak longer than their 3 minutes, I think that's helpful with the understanding that our intention is to have these questions and concerns vetted in this committee instead of at the full board. And I definitely think that, there will be an opportunity to submit things in writing, but when people show up to this meeting in particular, I think it's helpful if they're able to state their concerns, and so then we can either have the department address them now or as part of the Q&A. And since this meeting is recorded and is available on YouTube, then the department will be able to go back and add these questions into their questions and answers. Just in an effort to help the process and sort of, I guess, I think that there's a lot of frustration in the cannabis community, and I absolutely hear that and understand it. I also think that there's some misplaced frustration, particularly around timelines and what expectations should be. And I definitely feel like because timelines weren't clearly communicated to the public and the applicants, there's been this level of, well, it's not even a level, I guess it's a level, but it's also this dialogue around the need to mistrust the cannabis department, and I don't agree with that. I think that there's been a lack of communication from the board, and we could do better with that, which is why the cannabis department submits updates, and that's in a different agenda item that we'll be able to get to. But I apologize for being long-winded. I don't usually intend to do that, but I just felt like I should say that if we could have people speak for more than 3 minutes at this meeting, I think it's helpful.
yeah. Well, what I wanted to do was make sure everyone had a turn, and then we could circle back and hear more in-depth comments. So hopefully that works.
Good morning. Chantal Simon-Pietri. I'm a private environmental consultant. It's really great to be back in this room. Thanks for having us. I'm going to make really brief comments now. I won't take up my full 3 minutes, and with the idea being, or my understanding that I'll have the opportunity to come back as the discussion becomes more robust to see what other comments I'd like to offer. Of my preliminary review of the materials prepared by Ms. Nevedal in the department, thank you so much, Kristen, for preparing them. It's really great to see an application and actually some form of more detailed guidance as to how people can prepare. In general, I would like to see this entire offering be reviewed at this point. Is it destined for applicant success? And in any way that it is in balance with successful administration by the department. And so any way that it is looking to be too restrictive or too pressured, or where it can be softened or expanded, if that would allow for more people to have successful applications go through in the fastest timeline on their first try, rather than apply, deny, or partial approval. So I agree with Ms. Nelson's comment, and I think this is probably the fundamental one for me, is that the application period should be open, as other state-administered environmental fund grants are, meaning rolling application, that I don't see any benefit to having a tight application period. The application period as printed in the document is only 3 weeks long, and that is incredibly short. As Hannah said, if you have this amount of time to review the materials, there's no open dialogue back and forth, you submit your application, you have 3 weeks basically to turn them in. I don't see that as being something that helps people successfully apply. And in other grants that I apply for, there is a pre-application, and then an open dialogue review with the reviewers, where you get back comments directly from the reviewers as to where your application was lacking in information, and then you submit a full application. That's what CDFW has gone for with the Qualified Cultivator Program, because the applicant pool is so unfamiliar with applying for technical grants. And I think we're dealing with the same exact applicant pool. These are qualified cultivators, meaning they're provisional license holders, is what the state DFW fund requires. And so in successful application and dialogue back and forth, I would recommend that it be, I can talk really loud, okay. I could recommend that it would be a rolling application period, and that be tried, and make the rolling application period be, do 6 months. It doesn't have to be open forever. It can still be bound to some degree, but not 3 weeks, which is excessive. And have there be a pre-application. Once the pre-application is received, there is, whether it's Kristen or it is the senior planner, reviews that, gives back a written document, and has a Zoom meeting with the applicants where they explain, hey, what you provided us on this, we need to understand better how that's going to accomplish your objective. All what they're relying on now is all written formatting, and I think that there's a great gap in how information is shared and written that could be closed or better communicated with written plus verbal dialogue with an in-person meeting. In the DFW grants that I've applied for, that has been the most successful part of their program, is having these open meetings where you apply, you give a sketch of what it is, you give a sketch of your budget. It's like a draft. You submit the draft, the agency reviews it, they come back and they say, hey, we've got questions about this one, this one, this one, and they're all numeric. On number 2B, we have a question about this. Why does that number say that? How are these LEAP funds going to be used this way? And it clarifies everything. And then once DFW gets back the full application, they generally take about 30 days before they let you know if you've been approved or not, and then the timeline goes for them writing your approval letter and you getting into where you're contracting, where you can actually start your work. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, who do we have online? I guess Michael Katz?
I'm sorry, this is Monique Ramirez. I think I'm logged into his account for our MCA.
Okay.
But if that's okay, I'll start. So one of the questions that we have is about the application window to apply. It was stated by the director that there's a 4 to 5 week window, but actually there's only 3 weeks, from February 17th to March 10th. So just want to make that clarifying point. And then also if LJAGP applications are going to be the priority of MCD to review beginning March 10th through April of 2023, how's that going to impact the rest of the workload for MCD in order to continue also processing portal applications, renewals, and Appendix G applications that are coming through? Especially if this award grant has such a short window, that's a very concerning touch point. And then also if applications are reviewed, or we're questioning if applications are going to be reviewed during the application window after they've been received, or if the department is going to wait until it closes and then start the review process, because that also draws attention to MCD's attention on these applications and respectively how it impacts the rest of the program. And also, what happens to leftover funds if not enough people apply? Will it be returned to the state? And is there a minimum that must be spent from the 10 million for these direct grants? Just because it's so narrowed with the scope, I'm curious how many we actually think are going to apply. Let's see, the other question I had here, that, yeah, if we don't have contracted help until, maybe sometime in February, since you guys are streamlining that process to go back to the board, has the department already solicited for this contracted help? Have we received a lot of response from the community to help us with these applications? That's a really big question that we would like to get answered. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
All right. So Paul Hansberry, Susan Tibbins.
Here's the chair.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm sharing computer with Paul. He'd like to speak after me, if that would be okay. Susan Tibbin, Lovingly and Legally, MCD Policy Committee. With regards to 2B, we speak in unqualified support of the letter, which addresses issues of dire importance. Many of us have been hanging on for years, and we're just out of time and out of money. Of particular import is page 3 of the letter. Paragraph 1, with respect to DCC and MCD position on the LEAP equity grant funds and control over LJAGP funds, with the continued changes of requirements and paperwork requiring an expert in finances. We are farmers. If we want to save our remaining small and legacy cultivators and stem the social and economic bleeding in our towns, we ask for the county and county council in particular to work with us instead of constantly finding ways to deny budgeted items, continually changing the rules, and expect a level of legal and business acumen, which it's just unreasonable and mired in minutia. We are not criminals. We're not bound on misuse of funds. We're trying to survive and contribute to our communities and county and to respect the seasonal nature of farming. Thank you, and a particular thank you to Ms. Neverdahl for the very, very complete analysis and sharing of her end of the program. Thank you very much. Paul Hansberry.
Good morning, Paul Hansberry. First of all, I want to commend Kristen for taking the initiative and seeing that using points for applications would be counterproductive. Running it by county council first to make sure that it doesn't get caught up and bogged down in cobblestone with the entire application sounds like a step in the right direction, and thank you for that. The only other thing that I would add is that what Chantel just said just put perfectly what I was going to propose, that there should be a way to have an in-person meeting to justify or to explain what is meant by when you submit your budget. The subjective interpretation by county council, more often than not, seems to be misunderstood, or at least the way that it's defined. It's not clarified enough so that someone can explain what the nature of it is and why it is appropriate. It's more like a site-specific explanation of it rather than just a black and white legal document. So lots of times the level of expertise from the applicant is less than one would expect from someone who's doing the reviewing. And so an in-person meeting to clarify and to go over the application in an effort to approve them rather than an effort to deny would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much, and we'll be talking again soon.
All right. Corinne Powell.
Thank you. Good morning again. I also am wholeheartedly supporting the comments made by MCA, by Hannah, by Chantal, by Scott Ward, And I want to just bring you supervisors' attention to a specific problem with timelines as presented so far by the department. For example, they are requesting question and answer in written form. I understand that that is objectionable to many of us. That is what was presented, so I'm speaking to it. If questions and answers are presented by the timeline and responded to by February 24th, submissions must be received by March 10th for applications. That is 11 working days. And I'm sure, supervisors, you can imagine if the answer to your very specific questions were not available 11 days before you had to present documentation in your application regarding who would be performing work, what contracts, what bids, what estimates, what invoices had been received, and you needed to include them in your application. 11 working days is hardly enough time to secure professional assistance, even maybe get somebody out to your property to observe the situation. So understand, we need more time. Point number one. Point number two, in the department's grant application originally for the local jurisdiction grant, much of the rationale and justification for the staffing requested had to do with the department preparing Appendix Gs. Today we're told no, the department is not going to do that, even though I've asked for that clarification for several months. Department doesn't want to do that as they don't have contract staff available. Then we get into application reviews, and we still have a contract pending for help in having planners come on board. I'm very confused about what the department is doing with staff, and why not. I hope that we can get more clarification on that. And I would just like to question the supervisors about why they believe that a year and a half for the department to be reporting on fund use is acceptable. I can't imagine any other department in the county structure that has that particularly liberal use of time and money. Thank you.
All right. Tamara Kislak.
Hi there. I'm a farmer. I'd like to thank everybody who's spoken before, who has dedicated so much time to this, and all of you present for hearing us out. As people have mentioned, we're in a pretty dire situation and in desperate need of these funds to be able to actually meet timelines so that we can get state annual licenses, which all us continuing to exist in the county as tax-paying citizens deeply affects the economy of Mendocino County. So I appreciate you taking the time to consider all of this. Speaking from my experience through the LEAP program, which I understand is going to be administered differently in-house for this LJAGP program, but from my year of back and forth and over 13 applications with very little communication, I'm concerned about visibility, communication, and, as people have mentioned, a desire to help people get through the process. I'm going to give you two quick anecdotes and then I'll cede the floor. When I work with the BCC, the DCC on other permitting things, I put in applications. They get back to me within days, sometimes hours, and with helpful suggestions on how I can amend my applications to meet the requirements. They're interested in success. They understand that their success and their ability to exist depends on us having the industry. And I would love to see that happen. in the county. What has happened with the LEAP program is that I will send in an application. I won't hear anything for months. I have no visibility once things go, what stage things are happening in. I get phone calls and emails only at night and on the weekends. And it's very unprofessional, frankly. But it leaves people really wondering what's going on. And I think it could greatly improve people's understanding if there was greater visibility into application process and where people stood in the application process, and if there was a willingness to try and suggest ways to get through instead of just cold stone rejecting applications with no explanation and no communication. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Jude Philman?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, supervisors. My name is Jude Philman, president of MCA. Thank you, Director Navigal, for addressing many of MCA's questions as listed in our memo for this agenda item. We appreciate Supervisor Mulheron's suggestion and County Council's concurrence that the review oversight contractor conclusions could go directly to the Board of Supervisors. Anything to expedite this process. And at the risk of beating a dead horse, I have to pick up on some of my colleagues' comments about time and how long this is taking. The local LJAGP application format is complex. Timeline constraints are the most challenging. And when professional consultants are not even readily available to applicants, and providing specific invoices, estimates, bids, etc., may not be possible in the time allowed for submissions, which is so small. It makes it an incredibly frustrating and difficult process for applicants. Similarly, it's nearly impossible. How do they contract for necessary work until operators secure funding from grants to pay these contractors? Many of them expect some money up front. That's fair. MCD and applicants face state licensing deadlines, and without providing the largest window possible to apply for this important grant funding, many operators will not be able to comply with MCD requirements. Speaking of which, in general, DCC and MCD provide information regarding ineligible uses and costs. MCD, however, has taken upon itself to reserve the right to determine, quote, other prohibited uses as determined by MCD. In the past, MCD's demonstrated many deficiencies in the rollout of the LEAP equity grant funds, and control over LJAGP fund disbursement is a chilling prospect for many of our operators. County auditor and GGC oversight is imperative to minimize MCD's repeated penchant for changing requirements, delays, and a lack of transparency in direct funds distribution. MCA offers specific recommendations for the LJAGP application form to make it a little bit more coherent and understandable. And we ask that you check our memo to consider these. I'm going to highlight just a couple that will illustrate a continuation of some past problems with applications to the MCD. Given the time, I'll just highlight one for your sake. In 2.0, improving air quality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, section 2.1 on page 7, we recommend that solar be an allowed expense without requiring that it be tied to transitioning from a generator or other combustible engine. Some operations are off-grid and they're not using generators and may not have enough energy from their current solar system to provide adequate power for some of their operational needs that they would like to improve. So that's just an example. If you go through our list of added suggestions, you'll see other ways that the application form could be made easier and more understandable. And I thank you for your kind attention.
All right. Well, we've gone through that list of people. Oh, no, Jude popped up again. But, so, are there any comments? Do you have any?
Yes, I do. the department, the board, we've been discussing this grant and these applications, as has been noted, for many months. Generally, all of our cannabis applicants know where they may be deficient in their applications. That information has been received. If I were an operator, I would have spent this however much last time getting ready for this application to be available. And although it's not in its final form, certainly as of last Thursday, I would be figuring out exactly what I need to do next in order to apply for receiving these funds. Because as an operator, I would know that I had either CEQA deficiencies or I have, on the ground work that needed to be done. So it's very frustrating to hear we must continue to delay. And I don't know if that is about very specific people, but it is my understanding that we have operators that have been following this and will be prepared and ready to submit applications. So I don't want to continue to further delay. I hear the need for making sure, of course, that the $10 million gets out. And maybe some of the callers didn't hear the answers to the MCA memo, so hopefully they can go back and listen to that. It will be included in the Q&A, but as Director Nevedal, as far as the rollout, so if people don't submit by the deadline, can you tell us what's going to happen next?
If folks do not submit their grant application by the deadline, they will not be considered for funding in this application period. So I don't have a timeline currently for a second round of direct grant application submissions. I don't think it's possible for us to consider a rolling application timeline. The reason for cutting off the application submittal timeline in March is so that we can use the rest of that month to conduct the reviews, do the work that's going to be needed with county council, which is going to take some time, and then make sure that funds are released in ample time for this upcoming work season, which generally spans June through about October, depending on when the rains start. So extending the grant application timeline, moving into, say, a rolling application timeline would eliminate our ability to ensure that funding is available to a significant number of applicants for this upcoming work season. And it is crucially important that the funding be awarded in time for folks to do the work they need to do this summer. There's no way around that timeline because folks are going to need to complete fish and wildlife projects, perhaps water board projects, in order for them to be eligible for not only an annual license, but in some cases for renewals at the state level. So this is why the timeline is set up or structured the way it is.
And if the funds aren't all used and they're still available, then would we be able to reopen?
I think we can absolutely consider that. I am planning on bringing back a proposal to reduce the amount of funding in the direct application pool. I think it's going to be, if we look at the amount of funding we're spending down and the timeline for spending it down in the LEAP program, which is very broad, what that funding can be used for. The department does not believe we'll be able to spend down $10 million in 2 years based on the scope of this program and what we're seeing with spending and other grant programs. Additionally, there are, the department has expenses. We have no general fund monies, and so as expenses mount and revenues are down, we may need to rely on some of that direct grant funding to cover salaries and other department needs.
And I have one more question about the LJAGP, but is there a camp component
No.
to this grant?
There is not. The eligibility requirements are, you must have an active AG and/or CFBL number in the county and a provisional license at the state, because this funding is specific to assisting commercial cannabis businesses in achieving annual license and completing their CEQA requirements.
Well, my big picture concern is, just like we saw with the LEAP grant, that a lot of your time was spent dealing with the LEAP grant applications and making sure that they're eligible, and just an inordinate amount of time was spent with that process. And my fear is that with you and the chief planner being the people who are going to be administering this program, that the big picture is we need to get people to their annual licenses. And if we don't have you dedicate, and the chief planner really dedicated to overseeing the program and making sure that the path we're taking is to get those people to their annual licenses, then it's concerning to me that, this could be another time gobbler for you. And a lot of your time will be spent on administering this program and not just dealing with getting people, through the Appendix G and to their state annuals. So, have you thought about that?
I mean, absolutely, it's going to be a time gobbler. There's no way around it. Again, this is the reason for having a window of application submission, closing that window of application submission. It allows us as department staff to create time blocks to manage these applications, along with time blocks to manage application review, to manage trainings, to manage LEAP reviews, to manage ACELA implementation, to manage board direction about ordinance changes that are all coming up. So we have thought about that, and again, we structured the timeline according to what we feel are the needs of the department to work through the applications we receive, and also be able to address all of the workload that the department has on its plate.
So have you thought about delegating this to someone else within the department?
There's no one within the department to delegate this to. So these are all capital improvement projects. They do need planner type of review. Our planners are reviewing applications, primarily renewal applications currently. We're getting ready to transition into non-issued applications, and I do not have the planners available to pull planners off of their application reviews to manage this direct grant. So I will likely utilize some of our chief planner's time, but she is the only other individual in the department that may be available to assist with these reviews.
All right, it's concerning to me. I'll just put it out there. Because the goal has to be getting people to their state annuals. So, yeah, Supervisor.
Beyond just, I'm not going to say it's concerning without asking, what, if anything, do you need in the form of support? So you're already working on hiring additional people. You're working on getting the contract approved. Is there anything at this point that we could offer that would assist with making sure that we're able to help with the timeline?
I don't think so, because it would be going back in time, right? We've tried to staff up over the past year with no offices to put people in. So now that we have offices to put people in, right, we are fully trying to interview for every single position we have available. That's in and of itself incredibly time consuming. So between the chief planner and myself, we are managing all of the HR components, the interviews, so, you know, we are doing our best, but we could not have done more earlier because we simply did not have the space to do more earlier, right? So we are doing the best we can with the timeline and the resources that are in front of us, and we're appreciative of the new space in Willits and the ability to hire and fill positions. We have some much-needed management positions to fill, and we are actively working on doing so. Getting additional management positions filled may result in some additional support in reviewing these applications and administering this program. I mean, that is the hope with looking to hire additional management as a priority. But again, those hiring processes take time, and we are currently working through those processes.
All right, maybe we'll go to another round of public comments if there's any out there. Ms. Nelson.
Thank you very much, and I will try to streamline it and submit some other things in writing. First off, I just want to see if there's a way to bifurcate some of these application types as a way to expedite, because not all are capital improvement projects. A lot are for hiring CEQA consultants. Everybody's been waiting, not everybody, a lot of people have been waiting to this point to hire their CEQA consultant because they're not far enough along in the application review process, and therefore now is the time if they're going to meet the deadlines, and this funding makes that possible additionally. So it seems to me that there might be benefit in looking at whether those things can be bifurcated so that issues that are not related to a planner can be possibly delegated to a different type of administrative process. Not sure if that's practical, just throwing it out there. You know, as a previous caller talked about, interested in success, and the state is interested in success. And I just want to go on record. I do not believe that anybody at MCD, including Ms. Nevedal, or anybody in any county position, is not invested and interested in success. I believe that they are. However, I believe that sometimes what happens is balancing the considerations and the factors can get obscured. And what appears like a good administrative thing to do for ease of administration winds up being short-sighted and complicating things further. So I just want to go on record. Don't really think any of this is about bad intent. I do think that the rolling admission is important, because if you have people who are slowly turning in, and again, within a limited time frame, as Ms. Simon-Petrie said, like, then it will also help the workflow and how much time is being spent at any one time. But it's just an unreasonable short period of time. And I'm sorry, Ms. Milhoran, Supervisor Milhoran, it's just not true. People could not get their materials ready because we didn't have any of this information. So it's just not realistic. There is also a lack of information, a lack of clarity. Like, if we knew what requests were being made of the state for amendments to this grant, it could also help, because maybe there would be suggestions of additional amendments that would help ease this process from a different perspective. So it's, again, important for transparency, and we should really understand, well, what requests have been made of the state to change the grant so far, even if they're not being accepted by the state and we're being asked to submit them in a different form. We need to know what those are. It's also unknown how the technical part of prioritizing equity applicants is going to go, and I apologize if I missed that. Another issue is all those people who are in VegMod limbo. Is the same thing going to happen here, where their applications are being held and not processed? and therefore not moving along because they're in that limbo, or anybody else who's in limbo for any other reason. It's kind of important to understand where that fits in. The in-kind aspect of the application is a bit confusing, and it's just, you know, if that is intended to be able to see that people aren't double dipping, completely understand that. But it's also important to make sure that if somebody has a category in their LEAP grant, and they also have the category in this grant, that it not just be automatically rejected, but that afforded an opportunity to explain how they dovetail. Because we've been talking for a long time about being excited, hearing the details of this to see how best people can leverage different resources, because that's the goal for ultimate success. Leverage the LEAP grant, leverage CDFW qualified cultivator grants, leverage this, so that you put together a whole picture. So we just want to make sure that the processes are not so limited in writing that something would be caused to be rejected rather than explained. And I think that goes to the suggestion of the in-person discussion may be helpful. And if the department needs further clarification or documentation, they can get that. I have some technical questions, but I think I'll wait for the question and answer. But again, I really hope that that can be an interactive and not just submit and respond type of a process. I do think that there's a huge issue regarding not being able to use any funds for correcting violations. And I'd love the opportunity to explore the parameters that the state has with respect to this versus what the county is imposing as far as that being restriction. So there's a lot of people who maybe were told by somebody who graded their property years and years ago, oh, you don't need a grading permit, it's 50 cubic yards, which is not the correct thing in Mendocino County, but everybody thought that was true. And now they're learning they needed a grading permit. If I understand these materials correctly, they would not be able to correct any violation that they may have had for that old grading by using these funds. But that violation would prevent them from getting to annual licensure. So I think it's really important that we tease out and really understand, and if there's a need to go back to the state, since there are additional amendments being proposed to the state, to clarify these things and really find out what is possible. It's critical because so much of this work is related to kind of the past catching up with the present and resolving that. And in general, the standard of, you know, achieving an annual license is the overarching theme, but I think that it's important that the criteria that are used, whether it's to reject or to accept, are expanded to ensure that anything related that's not prohibited by the state to achieving annual licensing is allowed. The other question that I had is, will there be an opportunity if there are technical changes, let's say to the application or any of this process, will there be some opportunity so that we're not using up all the time here to go through all these technical things, to make additional changes, to hear the input and have a dialogue about it, and then will changes be possible? And I know we're on a tight time frame. The issue regarding cobblestone, I really hope that maybe some of the pre-work with county council is that county council goes back and reviews whether or not all aspects of cobblestone are actually needed in the context of grant. I know that this issue came up with respect to the equity grant, and that county council indicated a willingness to go and look at that and actually identified that maybe because Cobblestone was set up for broader contracting for the county and checks and balances in that way, and grants from the state have set parameters, that maybe there are steps along the way in Cobblestone that really aren't needed, and especially because of such detailed review by MCD and then detailed review by county council. So I would request, if the committee agrees, to see if county council can work on that now before they get this slog of work with MCD to perfect things. I definitely, let me just see if there's any really other big issues. Oh, one small thing, it is big in general, but it's a small detail, is I fully encourage the use of software to translate verbal question and answers in meetings into a Q&A, so that it doesn't take staff time, which is why they haven't been done like that in the past, but that then those verbal questions and answers, whether in MCD meetings or in a meeting about this that's provided by MCD, are then translated and posted without taking up staff time. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi again. I'm taller than Hannah. Chantal Simon Pietri. I might be less, even less eloquent on this round, so just warning. Thanks for the extra time. I wrote notes during all of that dialogue. It was really great to hear all the comments that we did. I'm going to list, well, I'm just going to go through them. Some are going to be questions, some are going to be comments. Again, coming back to my experience writing and implementing as a project manager current DFW grants. Right now I have 2 approved qualified cultivator grants that I'm administering, that I wrote the grants for in partnership with the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District, and 1 watershed enhancement grant that I wrote in partnership with the Salmonid Restoration Federation. Many lessons learned over the last 2 years of how to write a grant, the whole process. All of those we've found that, and DFW has learned on the fly, and we're still evolving the method with them, that there's a need for contingency funds, particularly related to materials costs. So for example, the primary one that's come up is steel. For culverts, for example, when you are pricing out a culvert, let's say you have to submit an estimate in this grant application today, by the time you're actually making the purchase, which you cannot fix a price until you place a deposit down, the steel prices have gone up by about 20%, and they're rising at some sort of a rate per month. The rate of rise has slowed down from what it was 18 months ago, but it's been significant to where all DFW grants include materials costs, whether most likely it's for steel, which could also include any sort of bridge components. The grant as allotted does not, those funds do not cover the true cost of the grant in order to perform the contract. So as the applicant who's approved, in this case it would be the individual cultivator, I'm assuming they would be signing a contract with the MCD stating that they're going to perform X amount of dollars of improvements on their property, and they're obliged to do that or explain why they are not. So I'm recommending that there must be a way, and that the analysis happen on the front end now as to how contingency funds will be addressed. In the DFW form, we've had to go back and make a subsequent request or reapportion under categories of the grant. So there's a subcontractor realm where you have your biologist in there, you have your contractor in there. Sometimes materials costs are included in the subcontractor portion of the budget, and we take money from subcontractor A, reduce their budget to give more money to subcontractor B, who's going to cover the cost of the pipe. But these are things that have taken a year with DFW, who has been administering the Fisheries Restoration Grant Program for 25 years, and they are still having to work within their means to develop a successful program. So I give this comment in the hope that the MCD can hear this and begin to think now about how contingencies will be addressed, so that 1, the project can go through as it was destined to, And two, the applicant who's then contracted to perform the project, which is the cultivator, is not in a situation where they cannot follow through on their end of the contract because they don't have enough funding for it. Just leaving the cultivator to cover the gap in cost of a bridge or a pipe or 10 pipes, if that's what needing to replace on a rural property, I have concerns about that. So that one addresses contingency funds and basically what would be the process for making an amendment. This one I'm going to have is kind of a hard time speaking it, and so just bear with me as I try and talk it through. But in past MCD meetings where we discussed CEQA, we heard of so this relates to CEQA and the purpose of LJAGP. That's why I'm coming into CEQA talk. We heard of there being, this rush for local cultivators to obtain CEQA certification, which allows them to transition from their provisional to their annual. That's the big picture goal. We've had this pressure and stress. We've been hearing about this for 5 years since the last round of board members were here. And the understanding that I have is that documents are prepared, whether by the cultivator themselves or by a consultant such as myself or whoever, or maybe potentially internally by the department. Those are prepared, submitted to the department for review, and the department is going to essentially read through the project description, read through the Appendix G, and check off on the bottom that these materials as prepared, the county is going to certify that they satisfy CEQA requirements. That document, some format is going to be returned to the cultivator. They're going to pass it to the DCC. The exact procedure of the back and forth and how the information is shared with DCC is still not clear to me. I'm assuming it goes that way. I prepare the materials, I turn them into the county reviews them, they check the box. I'm speaking this is happening in a really great timeline. It'd be awesome if it was that fast. They check the box, it gets given back to the cultivator gives it to DCC, DCC says yes, they satisfy the requirement of certifying that CEQA review has been completed to the standard that's required for Mendocino County, and now that application can be transitioned from provisional to annual. So in that whole analysis of flow, there was a one-step review process of just certified as complete. In past weekly meetings, we began to flesh out in conversation with Director Nevedal as to there being a two-step process where instead of it being a certification of satisfying CEQA, there was going to be a completeness review of material submitted, and then a pause in review, and at a later point, then the certification review would happen. Does that make sense? So and then instead of it being one step, it began to be fleshed out in conversation and comment and back and forth that it was going to become into a two-step. So if it's going to be a two-step process or not, we need to hear better information on that, because this grant has a timeline to it. Let's say it's expanded to 18 months is the longest timeline I heard Ms. Nevedal state in her presentation at the beginning of the meeting. If it's expanded to 18 months, is the grant timeline sufficient to line up with when somebody needs to transition from provisional to annual? So this is where I'm going to have a hard time explaining it, and maybe the commentary can come along with other people participating, but my concern is that we don't know enough from the department, and I don't know if the department yet knows their timeline for when they're actually going to be doing the true CEQA review to determine that something is not just completely submitted materials, but actually certified as the certification step. So completeness is step A, certification is step B. When is A going to happen and when is B going to happen? And how do those line up with the potential funding approval of the entire intent of this grant, which is to get people all the way through to provisionals to annuals? This is the technical world that I work on a daily basis. I draft CEQA documents. I've submitted about 8. I've received comments on none so far. So me as a consultant, I submitted some, I think my first one's in August of 2021. I have not received back yet any comments, so I have no idea as a consultant whether or not what I'm preparing is even to meet the level of review that the county is going to be applying to them. We still don't have any review standards for CEQA materials, so we're now talking about rolling out a grant program with the entire intent being to assist people with CEQA transition, but from the reviewing agency, we don't yet have any technical information letting us know what's going to satisfy their review. We don't know according to what standard they're going to use. So not only we don't have enough information to know how to prepare the materials that this grant is intended to fund, nor do we know if the county's timeline internally of their review of the materials, getting them to completeness is step one, and then certification is step two, is actually going to move along in a way. Like, we need a projection of how is this all going to come together, including all of their other staffing requirements and their permit reviews that have already been discussed, the question of timing. And I just, again, want to say, like, running this program is a super noble endeavor, and going from illegitimate industry to legitimate industry in our rural county with everybody underfunded, disadvantaged economic communities, it's a Herculean task to do. And I think all of us participating together is working fairly well. And our comments are intended to broaden the inputs from multiple perspectives, not to criticize or slow things down or just be brakes on the process. We also want it to continue forward. Let's see, what else is next?
Let's see, can we, Ms. Nevedal, do you have an idea about the timeline and how that might work for the timing of the, phase one, phase two,
Well, when an applicant submits a Appendix G document, we review it to ensure that it is properly formatted and has the basic information we think we'll need to conduct a thorough review. So that means that the Appendix G template is filled out. It includes a project description. It has the correct applicant name on it. It has the correct AG number, the address, the APNs. All of the checkboxes are filled. All of the areas where supplemental information is supposed to be inserted have been filled in with supplemental information, and that it is sent to us in a Word document format in track changes. We additionally look at the supplemental materials document that's required and make sure that that is appropriately formatted and that it appears to have, just at first blush, the materials we think we'll need to use to conduct the review of the Appendix G. When all of those pieces line up, we deem the submission complete, we accept it, and we notify the submitting party that we have accepted their Appendix G materials and that upon assignment for review, we will be billing them when we assign the materials to the reviewer. So in the state statute, the requirement is that the applicant must have submitted a complete checklist to the agency in order to be eligible for a renewal on or after January 1st of 2023. The staff, unfortunately, when Appendix Gs were first developed, there was not staff training developed at that time. So we are working through staff training so that we can conduct the final reviews and anticipate doing those final reviews as we either work through the renewal application and or are working with the applicant to ensure that they meet the timing necessary or the timing put forth by the state to be eligible for renewal. So some of those timelines are going to vary based on when the applicant is subject for renewal of their provisional license. And again, they must have an issued permit in Mendocino County for us to accept the Appendix G. So we do need to focus first on getting submitted applications reviewed and either issued or denied. And then we will move on to substantial reviews of the Appendix G materials.
So, let's see.
Go ahead.
Are you going to be much longer?
Probably not.
Okay, because at some point we have to take a break.
Sure, I took mine already.
Okay.
At least I ran to the bathroom while Hannah started
So,
commenting.
why don't you finish up?
Sure. I didn't understand Ms. Nevedal's response to your question. That's what I was going to comment on next, is you asked a clear question and I got kind of lost in her response of timeline, and I just heard it would, like, the common answer is we're prioritizing this and then that, and we can't do this until we do that, and it seems like it's evasive. And I know you don't mean it to be that way, but as somebody who's listening and I'm intelligent, I didn't get a clear answer. I don't know if you understood what her answer was.
Well, my understanding was that there's this process, but we don't have clear dates to the process. Is that correct?
That is correct because we plan to prioritize folks based on their need, which is triggered by their provisional license renewal timeline.
Yes, and we've heard that through multiple MCD meetings, the wonderful graph that says, starting with the ones that I need to renew by this date, and the ones that I need to renew by that date. I would like my point to not be lost in the conversation, and maybe I'll come back up for more comments about it, is how does funding this program line up with the county's review of CEQA materials, and can you chart out whether it will be successful or not, or are we just hoping that it will be? The last comment I have is regarding LSAs, Lake and Streambed Alteration Agreements with DFW. DFW deems you to be in compliance with your final, which means it's fully executed, which means you're in compliance with a fully executed agreement. And you have a particular timeline that's written in as a term of your agreement, which is a work completion date. And so XYZ projects that you already proposed to them with the engineering material, all the engineering designs behind it, DFW signs the contract and says, we agree you're going to do that type of project, and you have to do it by whatever date it is. They generally, in local cannabis LSAs, it's a 5-year grant, 5-year term of the agreement. So if it's fully executed on whatever date, you have then 5 years to complete all of the work. If you are within the terms of your grant, you are in compliance with your LSA. I started to say grant. If you're within the timeline of your Lake and Streambed Alteration Agreement, then you're in compliance with DFW requirements. So when I've heard for a year now a lot of anxiety and stress and like this, everybody's got to rush to do all this because if they don't comply with their DFW agreement, then they'll be out of compliance with DFW. They won't be able to either renew their existing or transition from provisional to annual. And I don't believe that's correct. I've gone back to DFW multiple times about this to say that DFW allows you to, let's say your 5-year term includes replacing 10 stream crossings, you run out of funding after you've done 5, so you personally as the landowner don't have the money to do the other 5. Within your 5-year time period, you can submit for a minor amendment, which you're allowed to do once for each LSA, and you can extend that timeline to whatever. They generally like you to extend it for 3 years or less. They generally don't want to do it for more than that. And just to say, I don't have any more money, I'm going to go look for more money, or the weather didn't allow for me to do this amount of work that I thought I was going to get done in one construction period. And so I just raised the question to say that the default to everybody needs to rush, we have to fund all of this now, it's got to all be done for this construction season to happen, because if not, nobody's going to be able to transition from provisional to annual. Therefore, we can't do rolling admissions, or we can't do a pre-application with an in-person meeting to confirm that the application is sufficient. I think that is an exaggeration and inaccurate depiction of the LSA terms and agreements according to DFW. That's all. Thanks.
Okay. All right. We're at quarter after.
Okay, I'm just going to add one thing, and that's a clarification to support was what Chantal just said, and that is DCC requirements for an annual do not require the work in the LSA to have been completed. It requires a complete LSA and for you to be in conformance with your LSA terms.
Got it. Okay. So we have a couple people who have their hands raised in the Zoom world, but I think we need to take a break right now. So let's take a break for 10 minutes. Come back at 25 after. back in session. So really, we have some time conflicts. We have some appointments at 1, and so we're going to have to end by noon. And so we're going to start trying to crack down on the time comments. So we have a couple comments on the Zoom for this item 2B that we're continuing. So let's see, Paul Hansberry, Susan Tibbins.
Hello, this is Paul. I'll be brief. I'm grateful that Hannah Nelson brought up the issue of cobblestone. A little over a year ago, I brought this issue because it does need to be upgraded. I contacted Cobblestone about a year ago, and they told me that could be very easily done to suit programs like this, that what was existing was just for onesie twosie kinds of contracts and not for a big flood of grant applications. So perhaps that can be revisited, although there is another major logjam as it relates to Cobblestone. And also in speaking to what Supervisor Mulhern was talking about, I submitted my Appendix G about 1.5 years ago. I assumed everything is correct and everything is great and everything's just fine. I don't know if there's going to be anything else that's going to be required that might require funding through this LJAGP program, because I don't have the results back or any kind of comments back from my Appendix G. I understand that the staff is overloaded, but I would take issue with the comment that we should know what we're supposed to be doing and what we need to be funded, because we don't. I can only assume that everything is accurate and everything is fine, but if it isn't, I'm going to miss the window for applying for these funds to have it corrected. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tamara. Tamara Kislak. Okay, so if she's not on anymore.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Hi. Hi. Yeah, just one of the things I forgot to mention in my last commentary is that I've noticed that there's this timeline portion of the application, and this was very difficult during the LEAP application process, where applicants need to tell the department when they want to do the project. The problem with that I ran into is that if it takes 1.5 years or a year to get through the application review process, then the applications have been rejected because the timeline has already passed. And so I'm not sure if that's something, I'm not sure where that requirement comes from, or where that the desire to have the timeline specific for a specific activity comes from. But I have found that to be a very difficult thing to navigate in previous experience, because I apply for something, I say I need it March, my application continues to be reviewed through December, and then they come back and say, well, you can't do this in March of last year. It's kind of a hard situation to navigate. So maybe, I don't know if that's required, but I would suggest that if it isn't, that you just have it fall within the time period allowed by the grant recipient. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So that's it for the comments from the public. I guess we do have this issue with the department wanting to have this set window, and we're hearing a need for a rolling application. Maybe we could kind of do a couple windows and have, the first window open and then close, and then a few months later, after those are processed, then go back to opening the window again, and it would create kind of a rolling application process. Is that a possibility?
I don't know that we'll have the staffing to manage that. I mean, I really think we need to work through this first application submittal review timeline, and then determine, based on the remainder of funds and what sort of additional projects may be out there, if and when to reopen the LJAGP direct grant application process. But right now, if we were going to commit to opening it every 2 months, my job will be simply bogged in doing not much more than reviewing LJAGP applications and then administering the rollout of funding. So I really would appreciate an opportunity to get this program off the ground and get through the application process without having to commit to a second round of timing for a second round of application submission. Let us get this one
Okay, so we'll
completed
deal with the
first.
first window and then we'll see what happens.
I would appreciate that.
Supervisor Mulhern.
I think maybe we could even go one step further and just agree with the timeline that's submitted. The recommended action is to move this forward to the full board for approval, begin the grant program, and then review at the June GGC meeting where we are, and then see when or if a new window can be opened. But what I really don't want is to have applicants wait because the timeline is too big or because they know there's going to be another timeline. I really do want people to participate and feel a sense of urgency to get in on this application.
Yeah, I think that if they have a need for the grant, there's probably a sense of urgency. So hopefully that will work itself out. Okay, so we have a plan for that. Okay, so we're going to move on to.
Excuse me, Mr. Supervisor, I think that, or Mr. Chair, whoever you are today, I do think that we need, so I think with that note, I would approve the recommended action as it was submitted in the agenda summary, and then I also would like to just give the department direction to include the questions that we heard today and the answers in the question and answer document.
All right, so we have, how do we do that in a standing committee?
Yeah, I think you could just call the vote if the chair would like.
Okay, we'll just call the vote. Are you going to do it, Atlas?
Yeah, I'm still working on incorporating
Okay.
her changes.
And that would include the recommendation to bring back the contract approval directly to the Board of Supervisors.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Oh, stop 1 sec.
I don't know that I heard that in the motion. I'm not sure if that's part of this item or if that could be brought forward as a separate item, simply with the consent of the chair directly to the board.
It is not part of this item. I mean, the planning staff contract is funded by the LJAP, right? But it is not part of the application or guidance document item, which is before you currently. And I don't know if we need, and Christian, sorry, Council Curtis, I don't know if we need do we need a motion to have me bring the planner contract directly to?
No, the department head can do that with the consent of the chair, so that could even be done outside of the meeting.
Okay.
This is Atlas Pearson, Senior Deputy Clerk of the Board. The motion that I have is the recommended action for this item, which was just, providing recommendations to staff and referral of the manual to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation that it be approved, as well as direct the department to provide the questions that were that came up today and include it in the online Q&A. Is that correct?
Yes, and to have the report or an update at the June GGC meeting. I do want to note that.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Supervisor Hashak?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, moving on to item 2C, discussion and possible action, including providing recommendations to staff and referral of the approval of the County of Mendocino Cannabis Department monthly update for January to the Board of Supervisors. All right, so Director Nevedal, since we're short of time, could you get to the
Can I get to the point on this
Get
one?
to the point, yeah.
Happy to do so. So I noticed that there were some questions about discrepancies. Just starting at the beginning of the report, I'll say that the timelines for the move presented on page 2 and the staffing information is the same as what was provided in December's report. There's no real updates there. We are into Acela integration, and I don't have a solid timeline on when AGs will be able to use the Acela platform versus CFBLs. That is still part of the implementation work we are embarked on currently. So once I have better information there, I'm happy to provide it. As far as the application review update numbers, I would like to just point out that there's no way for us to export this information. We are hosting this information in spreadsheets with multiple categories, and because some of our applicants and permit holders have multiple state licenses, the same AG may appear on the spreadsheet 2 times, 3 times, and so managing the numbers can be challenging if we're not always remembering to subtract duplicates, which I suspect is what happened in the discrepancy between 119 in good standing portal applicants versus 122, right? Is that I did not do due diligence in properly subtracting duplicates, so we have a variation here. We do have some increased deprioritizations because folks have not submitted renewed applications, or I'm sorry, renewed provisional licenses. So we have noted provisional licenses that have expired. I know there was a request for us to simply request the information from the applicants as opposed to deprioritizing them. And I just want to be clear that when a deprioritization letter is sent to an applicant, that letter also requests the license if that is the reason for deprioritization, and or the tax records if the taxes are the reason for deprioritization. So we already are doing that. Everyone who gets deprioritized also gets a list of what they need to submit to reprioritize. The application processing timelines.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So if a person is deprioritized, then, and they bring in that document, then how long does it take them to get into the prioritized list?
Generally about 10 days. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have assigned staff that addresses all reprioritization materials. So it goes to specific individuals on our team to manage that reprioritization review and the notification. The application processing timelines, I did not update. So there are likely discrepancies in these numbers versus the application review numbers because the number of active AGs, deprioritized AGs ebbs and flows. And if some folks didn't renew their state license, they might be deprioritized, and then that may not be accounted for in the application processing timeline because I did not go through and update this table. It is fairly time-consuming to do so, so I just repeated it.
I think that if you could put a note or an asterisk that, to that end, that would just be helpful, and then everybody can read it when it gets published.
That is a great idea. Thank you for that. State licensing timelines, this is also repeat information from previous updates just to keep members of the public and all of us aware of what is in front of us. And with that, I think I can stop my presentation.
All right. Any further comments?
No, I know that, our, I've only been a board member for 2 years, and I know that our HR process has many challenges. So, I think in all departments, there is a struggle to make sure that we're able to act quickly when we do find somebody that's qualified, and also to just, clearly we want to hire people that are qualified. We don't want just bodies in the seats. So I think setting the expectation that that hiring people does take a bit of time through the county system. I just want to relay that. I understand that there are challenges with that. I understand I was somebody that was advocating not to hire people until we had desks for them. So I understand that all of that took time, and with the holidays, just presents another challenge. So will all of the positions that are vacant and being actively recruited, would the contract for the planning take the place of any of those positions? Or would those positions all be hired regardless of what that contract, when it moves forward?
Oops, pardon me. Currently, with only $1.6 million for contractors, we intend to fill all of these positions if we can find qualified candidates. So we've been trying to hire a senior planner for over a year now, and we have not had a qualified candidate to interview for a senior planner. So,
Oh, yes, County Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to note, any contract would be subject to potential meet and confer requirements with the union first if we're talking about any contract that would be duplicative of what would otherwise be labor represented positions. So HR, I'm sure will work with the department to sort through that. But I just, before any labor organizations might become concerned, we will go through those steps.
All right, so let's go to public comment. Let's see, we have Paul Hansberry on his hand up. Why don't we go to Paul first?
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Susan Tibbin, sharing Paul Hansberry's computer, Lovingly and Legally, MCA Policy Committee. We're in absolute support of MCA's second letter with particular appreciation of item 7 for the modifications of the ridiculously named microbusiness or even a creation of a real microbusiness license. With respect to the timelines and state allowances being mirrored in county allowances, thank you to all previous speakers. The minutia of required information, the seemingly subjective denials with no explanations, and the continued delays on the county side and grant side with no additional time given to us, the applicants, is unfair and it is unproductive. Unless the county council, and the grant staff becomes inclusive and timely, we're just going to continue to lose applicants and tax dollars. Our county heritage and our smaller cultivators are disappearing by the day. So thank you for this opportunity to call attention to a really dire situation, and we appreciate the committee and the excellent suggestions they're making. Thank you.
All right, Scott Ward.
Brief, not quite so strident. Touching a document. First of all, let me say, once I get my 3 clients through this program and get a permit from the county and their annual license, you'll never see me about cannabis again. I promise you. Touching a document makes no sense in an office. I've ran building department for 15 years in City of Hillsburg. I was senior inspector here for 13 and a half years. And the worst thing you can do is handle a document, handle a document. You intake the document, permit, for example. Set of plans goes to the plan checker. It may be lacking where the water heater is, but the plan checker will do a comprehensive review of that set of plans and write a plan check correction letter, which may include some minutia stuff they missed, GFI outlets or whatever. But it saves time to do a completeness review. Oh, he's got this, he's got this, he's got this. Oh, I see I'm going to have to write a correction on that letter once he gets it back, when he puts this minor stuff on. That's a complete and total waste of time. It's inefficient. It's the wrong way to review an application. When you get an application in, it's taken in at the counter. You already have the checklist you have to fill out on these applications anyway. You do a completeness review and a substantive review at the same time. The letter may be longer, but why touch that document twice? Why look at it and go, yeah, it's complete. Got to wait for Excel before I review that. Yeah, that one's complete. I got to wait for Excel to review that. You're just lengthening the time of review. It makes no sense. You can use all the technology in the world to make your life easy. Oftentimes it's to the detriment of the applicant that's waiting for the county to catch up with their technology. You can review paper files. Building department does it all the time. Planning does it all the time. I've had people call me recently about water tanks. My understanding that MCD is saying the permits are required for water tanks under 5,000 gallons. That's not true. The building code under section 105.2 exempts water tanks 5,000 gallons or less that have a height to width ratio of 2 to 1. They're exempt from permits, period. End of story. The triage applications, give the simple, easy ones to the folks that can get them done quick. Break your staff up into pods for different review periods if you have staff. And look at these applications with a point of view of what's right about it, not what's wrong. How can I gotcha? Oh, geez, that's wrong. That's wrong. Your track changes isn't quite right, and you use the word and. I don't think you need to use that size of cobble. I think 3/4 minus would be better. Don't look at applications that way. Look how do you get it approved. In business, it requires surety of government regulation and review. Absolute surety of government regulation and government review of applications. These guys are businessmen too. If you keep having this ever-changing walkway, people have got to go down, and they have no surety of review. They don't know when. They can't plan their next grow season if they don't know where they're at in the application process. They don't know where that in the grant process. Overly subjective review, inventor rule changes, and handling documents multiple times is not a good way to run a department. None of the other departments run like that, except for this one. That's all I got.
Thank you, Scott. And yeah, there has been, I've been receiving emails about the water tanks and the requirement of a permit. And is that something that can be dealt with where if it's true that you don't need a permit for 5,000 gallons, that's not 2 to 1, then can that be?
We've already dealt with it. We reached out to
Okay.
planning and building, we received guidance, we shared it with our planners, but it is a 2 to 1, so the question will come up for planners to ask the applicant the dimensions of the water tank so that we will know whether or not it requires a permit. There's no way for us
Okay.
to know that without asking additional questions.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. This time I'm really going to be brief, I promise.
Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. This time I'm really going to be brief, I promise. One, veg mod status, if we can have an update as to when it's going to be calendared to the full board and if there's going to be additional materials released. Two, the reported numbers are really confusing, but that's already been dealt with in a memo and with Ms. Nevedal explaining some of it. Three, the timeline. One of the things that seems inconsistent is that, first off, it identifies 256 applications making it through in that year after the state rolling deadline, and just seems like, where did that number come from? Because it doesn't match stuff. Second, it presumes 11 full-time planners and 20 contract planners for that year, but there's only 5 planners plus only 3 openings in the vacancy, and the contract, as Ms. Nevedal indicated, only would allow for 6 months if it's all 20 planners. It doesn't mention whether inspections, AppG review, and also the planning permits that have not yet been dealt with that some applications must have are included in that time frame, and applicants were told that they should not apply for their planning permits and should wait. And then also the question is, did the state approve in writing the planned activities and make sure that those timelines are acceptable? I'm just a little concerned that the interpretation of what must be completed under the statutory requirement, the county and the state have had a history of misunderstandings about those requirements and being on the same page, so I think it would be prudent to just have us have that in writing and double check. Next issue is the LEAP equity grants are still not being processed for those who are in veg mod hell. And then a big one is the camp documentation, and I'd really like to have a little bit more of a dialogue about this. In the equity grant, the requirement under our current manual, the requirement is that the rate information is limited to camp. Camp was kind of a colloquial term that was used to indicate multi-jurisdictional task forces, and it could be even subsequent raids of only one agency. And it's really important that we understand that complexity, and in response to somebody raising this issue, actually, I think maybe it was me, in writing, Ms. Nevedal in a MCD or elite meeting said, no, that they're not anticipating changing that. And I would like this committee to discuss the pros and cons of changing that, because really, even if just one individual agency was executing a warrant, the impacts on the entire community were huge. People were threatened with 20 years of federal prison if they didn't turn in other people. The law enforcement agencies had some bad actors who wandered neighborhoods and caused all kinds of havoc, cutting water lines and other stuff. So I think it's really important to look at that requirement, and why not, if the impact to people who are involved in the cannabis business prior to legalization through criminalization was there, why not allow them to expand the documentation? The Board of Supervisors contemplated, by having the 5-mile radius, that everybody would probably be eligible unless they were in Ukiah proper. And then finally, I have, and I apologize for any typos and that it's not even on my letterhead, but I wrote my name on here, just a list of additional issues, hopefully, that the committee can consider. I have enough copies for each of the committee members, county council, and MCD.
Okay, thank you. All right. Let's see. Monique Ramirez.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for the chance to speak. This is Monique Ramirez speaking, 3rd District. One of the questions I have is about the Appendix G numbers. It looks like there are 46 now that have applied and have been turned in. It looked like 12 more were added from the December report, but it does say that 4 are under review. And I'm just curious, in total, if we could know how many applications have actually been approved for annual state license. I know of a few personally, so I'd love to see those numbers be included in the future. And maybe if Kristen knows offhand today, that would be great. And I really think it would be great to have a better understanding of the timeline that the county is going to have to get everybody through to the annual license. I know this was kind of spoke to earlier from Chantal's comments on the last agenda item, but the table that we got provided in this agenda is really great. It shows kind of a breakout of 256 applicants, like getting through all the way to state annuals and their timelines of when their provisionals expire at the state level, and kind of giving us that understanding. And so I really wish we could have that analysis conducted for all of the applicants that are in our program currently, so we could really understand if our county is going to be able to achieve this really huge goal of getting everyone to the finish line in time. And there are concerns about contracted help being able to assist MCD and getting enough staffing. I really hope that now that we have a bigger office space to house all of the employees, that will help move this along. But I do have general concerns about the timelines and being able to make this happen, because I doubt that the state's going to grant us another extension to get people to the annual license. And thank you for clarifying some of the numbers. I can understand that that can be hard to get everything in there correctly, but it is hard for us on the other end when we're reviewing the materials, when we scratch our heads going like, I don't understand why these numbers don't match up. So I appreciate everybody. It's disheartening just how long this process is taking, though. And I have to say, for my own self personally, I'm still going through my renewal. It's been almost 8 months. The county's losing money. Like at the year mark, that's a whole year that I didn't pay for a permit that I could have paid. So I just wish that process could go faster. I've never, ever had my permit take this long to be renewed. And I've been a permit holder since 2017. The only change that I made on this year's application was that I would like to trim my cannabis outside because I can't afford to do an F1 occupancy structure, and I can't afford to hire it outside through companies that offer that service. That's the only change. And so it's not a huge thing in my application yet. I'm still waiting, and it's been 8 months. So just wanted to let you guys know that that's what's happening for me personally. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right, thank you. Corinne Powell.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak again. I am sitting here listening to this meeting and I have so much accumulated frustration, and I would like to bring something to the attention of the committee. And it is not just you, it's the board, it's other committees as well. And that problem is a habit of approving the recommended action from staff after hearing really significant input from the public, people who are invested, not just politically or philosophically, but their whole lives are invested in this particular program and in their ability to at least sustain a business and therefore themselves. You listen and you accept the recommended action, and everything that was spoken about is lost. And we just continue listening to a staff presentation and having good requests for further investigation into why certain decisions are made at the staff level. Sometimes questions are properly answered, sometimes they're not, as Chantal brought home earlier today. And we continue with no results. We're all looking for positive results. And the habit of rubber stamping staff recommendations is clearly not working. In this case, there are criticisms of policies and procedures within the department. I believe they should be brought to light. They should be discussed because we're inefficient. We cannot accomplish all that we need to accomplish in reasonable time. So please think about how you're actually making proper decisions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I hope that, well, I just want to say that we are taking into consideration all the public comment and everything. So let's see. There's a couple of statements made. I'd like to know the veg modification. Is there a timeline for that coming back to the board or?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to have to confirm the exact date, but we did reserve some time for that to come back to the board soon. I believe it's one of the February meetings.
Okay.
But we may have to double check.
Okay, there was a, pardon?
It's on February 7th.
Okay. And then there's a request for the timeline to see how people are going to get to their annual licensure. So is that something that, could the department share that with the public at the next meeting?
Not at this time. I mean, we are.
At the next meeting?
Not at the next meeting, most likely either. So there's no way for the department to provide a timeline for a state agency to review materials and transition provisional license holders into annual licenses. The Department of Cannabis Control has until January 1st of 2026 to transition provisional license holders into annual license holders.
No, but all I want to
So-
see is what the county is going to do.
So we have a timeline for reviewing applications, and so the first thing we need to do is work through that timeline to get applications into a permit status so that we can finalize, go back, review, and certify these CEQA documents. And so we don't have an exact timeline for conducting those reviews and certifying all of the CEQA documents. We could take a crack at that, but it's going to be a little bit of a shot in the dark because it's going to be based on a hypothetical number of issued permits and when those permits may be issued. But I would imagine our timeline right now for reviewing applications is 1.25 years, and we will be overlapping some of the CEQA review with that timeline, I imagine. But then we'll probably, depending on how many issued permits there are, need additional time to review the CEQA documents. So that would probably take another year, is what I would anticipate.
Okay, and then another let's see, Scott, do you have a quick comment?
Waiting 18 months is the first portal. What I'm understanding, the director is saying it's another 1.25 years. It takes 3 years on an application submitted August 5th of 2021. That's not acceptable.
Is that a correct understanding?
I don't know because I don't know when his applicants will be subject to annual permit review, so annual provisional license review. So I don't know which round of review they'll be prioritized into. Now, I do want to say that we were directed to manage the portals and receive and to conduct reviews for completeness. That was the direction of the board to the department. That is exactly what we did with 3 planners in 2021. We have since staffed up, but we then were directed to do a corrections portal. We did that, right, which did not allow us to move on to reviewing applications for issuance. We now have an in good standing portal, which is additional work and renewals. The renewals that we're conducting are akin to, in many instances, looking at applications that have never been issued because they were issued erroneously without complete information. So we are doing the best we can to work through the applications on our plate with the staff that we have. And so if we had been directed to review applications for issuance, we would have done that, but the board direction over the last year or more has been to complete applications, and that is what we've been focused on.
Scott, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, it's a linear approach to business tasks within a department. We will do this, but we're not going to go any further with this. We're going to do this, then we're going to do the in good standing. You have to multitask in a government agency, and if she doesn't have the resources, give them to her. But August 5th, I received a completeness notice for two of my clients for the 2021 portal. August 5th, 2021. That was 18 months ago. When are they going to get reviewed? Is there a timeline or not? If we're waiting for Excella, if we're waiting for the renewals, if we're waiting for the Appendix G, if we're waiting for the correction portals, what is the timeline for folks that have been waiting 1 year and 6 months? What is it? That's a simple, honest question that should be answered directly without any ambiguity. That's my statement.
Okay.
The timeline is based on when those applicants are subject for renewal. We will be prioritizing the review of applications that are subject to renewal.
Applications aren't subject to renewal until the permit's issued, Kristen.
Okay. So, Scott, you're gonna, okay. All right. And the other comment was about the camp documentation, and I've gotten some emails about that, whether it's camp or local law enforcement, and can you clarify that?
Sure. So if an individual was raided by local law enforcement or the DEA or the IRS, right, on a cannabis-related raid, search warrant, that individual would be eligible for LEAP criteria. Well, they would meet the LEAP criteria for eligibility is what I should say. The question that has come up is, should all neighbors within 5 miles of that search warrant being executed also be eligible for the local equity entrepreneur program? And that is what we have declined as far as expanding the criteria. So when an individual is subject to a camp raid, right, and I'm thinking campaign against marijuana planting, using open field searches with helicopters in the air and crews on the ground. That is a very different program than a search warrant that's issued at a specific location, right? And so the request has been to expand the grant criteria to allow anyone within 5 miles of an executed search warrant to also be eligible for the equity program, just like anyone within 5 miles of a camp raid is eligible for the equity program. And we have not felt that it's appropriate to expand the search warrant criteria to include everyone within 5 miles of an executed search warrant. It doesn't necessarily fall under the lines of disproportionate impact. So this is what we said that we were not willing to adjust the criteria around.
Supervisor Mulhern.
So again, I mean, is this like a considerable amount of people that we're talking about, or is this something that is being brought up because it affects 1 or 2 people that would fall within a 5-mile radius of another raid?
I think probably most of the county would fall within the 5-mile radius of an executed search warrant. And so
Well, it was my understanding of that was true for camp raids.
I think some folks that are closer to the urban areas, such as Ukiah, Redwood Valley has come up, have had a really hard time identifying. Well, first of all, let's say this. Camp was much less active, if active at all, in, say, Redwood Valley with a higher population than Bell Springs and the Spy Rock area, right? So it's much easier to certify someone for having suffered through camp raids in the more remote locations where camp was very frequently enacted or engaged in on a year after year after year basis, right? So I think this request came up to try to qualify more folks in Redwood Valley or areas closer to the urban hubs where camp was less active.
Yeah, and I think when the board's intent was to make it pretty liberal in providing coverage, we said the 5 miles within a raid and understanding that it would probably cover most people in the county.
It's 5 miles within a camp raid specifically. So if it was the wish of the board to allow anyone within 5 miles of an executed search warrant to become eligible for the equity program, I would respectfully need to ask the state if that would qualify as a disproportionate impact. It is not outlined as a disproportionate impact in the assessment. So.
Okay. Do you have a quick comment?
I will try. My first one has to do with the timing of the meeting and it being restricted to ending at noon when this is the forum when we were supposedly going to be given more time to dialogue on these subjects. So I feel slightly misled that we are not having the time to dialogue substantially about them because of appointments that people have and that we then have to finish the dialogue at noon. And I ask it in the future. I'm not positive, but what is the time period of when the GGC meeting is supposed to be? Is it 9 to noon or is it 9 to 1? Or is it 9 till it's done?
Yeah, Atlas.
This is Atlas Pearson, Senior Deputy Clerk of the Board. So this meeting is set to go from 9 a.m. to noon to allow, on a normal day, we would have Public Health Safety Resources Standing Committee meeting the same afternoon at 1:30. So the idea was 9 to noon, allow staff a 1-hour lunch from noon to 1, and then we would be back prepping for the next meeting at 1:30. That's kind of the way that we've always structured our standing committees. The only difference between this year and last year is that we have swapped them back to general government being in the morning due to a large request from the water folks and relation to PHSR.
Okay, that answers that one. Thanks. So in the future, we'll plan on 9 to noon, and that's it, basically. And
Right.
if it's not addressed, we hope that we can bring it up at another time, I guess. So 2 comments. In the dialogue that just happened between Mr. Ward and Ms. Nevedal, there was a estimated timeline for an application to be processed of 1.25 years. And sitting in the audience, I've heard these estimates prior. We've been asking for a projection of a timeline for an application review. So maybe it's already been shared, and that's quite possible because there's a lot of information shared over the years, but it'd be great for the public to see how that timeline estimate is projected forward, and then they could fit their own project into that timeline and get an idea about when their application review is going to be complete. The second part is, given the number of staff that have been hired and the particular roles they're being assigned to or projected to be hired and assigned to, including outside contract labor, and the contract disputes and timelines for people actually getting up and going, and the quantity of people that are in application review process, or in the permit issuance and now in renewal, plus Appendix Gs, is do we actually have the quantity of qualified staff to accomplish what the goal is? We're hearing a lot of, I still think that there's evasion of commitment to a timeline to say when things will be done by. And so I wonder, we hear in the audience, I hear a lot of, we don't have the staff, we don't have the staff, we don't have the staff, we need a different program. Well, we got a different program, we're hiring more staff, but we still don't have a projection of whether or not this whole great big scheme of hiring staff and using Acela is actually going to get people from A to Z in the proper timeline. And I don't think it's an extraordinary request. It's just asking for transparency and accountability. Is the program being run in a way that the goal is clearly delineated and can be accomplished, or can it not? And lastly, coming back to camp, I don't believe it's the department's position. I don't think it's appropriate for them to be determining whether or not the disproportionate impact analysis should not fall within the department. How the 5-mile radius language, having it directly connected to camp versus to all search and seizure, her saying that there's a difference of somebody coming down in a helicopter versus 10 cars going down your road and the entire neighborhood talking in fear and people taking their children and leaving their properties. It's not, I think it's just really insensitive to have that come from the department to say that type of legal action against illegal cultivation is more impactful or less impactful than somebody else's. And therefore, you can or cannot use that 5-mile radius, and therefore, you do not qualify for LEAP funds. Again, if the goal is let's get people through, let's get them the funds they need to succeed in order to sustain the economic health of the county, let's have the criteria be more expansive and not put that decision-making authority with the department. Thanks.
Thank you. So the timeline, could you come back with a time? My understanding is application processing timelines that's laid out here is pretty much, people could look at it and say, hey, my renewal date is September of 23, and so I'll be processed in April, May of 23.
That's my understanding as well.
Okay.
That's why we put it together the way we did, was to hopefully provide that information.
Okay.
So for clarification, though, if I'm an applicant, I shouldn't expect to hear from the department until the month or the months that I'm supposed to be being processed. So yes, I am sitting and waiting, but there is no work being done on my application, and my expectation is that I'm not going to hear anything until the timeline that is laid out. So I feel like there's a miscommunication about what people should be expecting. If somebody applied 18 months ago or 3 years ago, submitted all their documentation properly the first time through the portal, it is through no fault of their own that they're not, or through no fault of the department that they're not being communicated with. The communication is, hey, April or May is when we're going to get to you.
Yes, and I would encourage folks to use that. The reason for printing, right, that timeline in this update, in December's update, is so that the public does have, the applicants do have an opportunity to better understand when their application may be assigned for review. And until their application is assigned to a planner or a contract planner for review, there's no changes being made to that application. There's no review being conducted. There's no change to the status. When someone completed their application through the portal and we sent them a complete application notice, that was the status, and that's the status that remains unless for some reason they were deprioritized. And then they would have received a notice identifying any reasons for deprioritization and what materials would need to be submitted for reprioritization.
Okay, and the issue with the camp, I think if you could check with the state to see if there are limitations and do they delineate between camp and local law enforcement action, I think that would be helpful, because I think we do want to make it as expeditious as we can for people to make it through this LEAP process. Okay. And with that,
Mr. Chair, I think we may want to clarify process on that. If the board does want to make a change, we could bring forward an agenda item for the committee to make that recommendation to the full board, if that's the direction you're going to go. But you may want a little bit of a determination first as to how much work is being put in before there's actually board direction on that.
okay. Could that come back next month to see how much work it would take?
That really depends on whether or not there's time for us to schedule an agenda item in February. So I know we won't get on the 7th.
No, this would be back to the General Government Committee.
Can I do that? Can I?
So we don't have an agenda item for today's committee meeting, right, that addresses this issue. So really for this committee to take it up, what we ought to do is come back with another agenda item at the next committee meeting to then let the committee take appropriate action. It's just this is really an off-agenda item is what I'm getting at.
Okay, great.
So
Yeah.
changing, thank you for that clarification. So Supervisor Housecheck, is the request that we agendize discussion about disproportionate impacts and equity eligibility for the February GGC. Is that your request?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anything else? Okay, do we need a motion to approve the item?
Yeah, if you want it to go to the full board, it's best to just refer the approval of it.
This is just the update on the department. So but we need it.
The recommended action states, provide recommendations to staff and refer the approval of the County of Mendocino Cannabis Department monthly update for January to the Board of Supervisors.
So moved.
Okay. Call the question.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Supervisor Hashek?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, is there any further public, item 3A, public expression?
Hi, Hannah Nelson. Just very briefly, I request deeply that all staff and supervisors review my quickly typed, so forgive errors, issue list for potential consideration in future meetings. And if you need further documentation on any of the issues, I have collected all of that and am happy to engage in that. Thank you.
Okay, Paul Hansberry or Susan Tibbins?
Yes, just quickly, I think that it might be worth looking at the state's criterion for eligibility for equity. It includes all, and I mean all, of northern Mendocino County. Right or wrong, it does not include southern Humboldt, but it does include all of, it goes by zip code. It doesn't have the 5-mile radius, so that's what the state criterion is. So it might be worth looking at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to, Corinne Powell.
Hi, again, I know we didn't have.
Did she? So can we? Corinne, you need to unmute.
How about now?
Good.
Sorry about that. Thank you again. Quickly, we didn't have an item agendized. We did not discuss the proposal I made at the beginning of the meeting regarding relief from the county's cannabis tax. I hope you two will bring this to the full board, requesting that there is relief granted. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further public expression, we'll move on to item 3B, approval of minutes of October 17th, 2022, regular meeting.
Move approval of the minute.
Okay, I wasn't at that meeting, so
You don't need to be at the meeting to vote on it.
I did read it, so call the question.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Chair Hashek?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Oh, was there public comment on that? Seeing none? Okay. Okay, item 3C, approval of minutes of December 12th, 2022, regular meeting.
Move approval.
Okay, are there any public comments? Okay, seeing none, call the question.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Chair Hashek?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, announcements. The next meeting will be from 9 to 12 on February, and I don't have that date. Oh,
It's February 27th.
27th?
Yes.
All right. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting at 12:20. Okay.